or whether we actually see a ratcheting up on them. That, of course, will be the key question for the markets. Also, in terms of NATO, so there's been a lot of interesting back and forth between President Trump, Emmanuel Macron, certainly an awkward and tense meeting and news conference in front of reporters. But one thing I noted as well, Roger, is that China is on the official agenda for the first time. And President Trump, it's kind of been reported how he's sort of done a bit of a U-turn in terms of his tone with NATO. I might be reading too much between the lines, but you wonder whether that change in tone might have something to do with the fact China is on the agenda as well.
Well, it's interesting because at the moment the trade war, if it is a trade war, is on several fronts. It's with France up to a point, certainly with Argentina and Brazil as well. You've got tariffs everywhere. What is actually going to happen in terms of the way the trade war progresses, and what threat that poses for alliances like NATO, that obviously are military alliances with a strong political dimension?
Yeah, and let's talk about the markets then, Roger, because we are 2.5 minutes into the equity market open here in Europe after 4 days of declines for the Stock 600. We do edge into the green today. We're up 0.1% there on the Stock 600. In terms of regional equity benchmarks, the FTSE 100 is the slight outlier, down 0.1%, but most other indices in the green, if in a muted fashion. The CAC 40 up 0.1%, the DAX and IBEX up 0.2%, the FTSE MIB higher by 0.1%. We saw a third day of declines for the S&P 500 yesterday, and futures actually point to a weaker open in the US. We were trading with a positive bias earlier. S&P futures down almost 0.2%, NASDAQ and Dow futures lower by 0.2%. Equity and bond markets yesterday were reflecting a similar story in the sense that as you saw equities sell off, you saw bond yields drop as well, and a significant drop in the 10-year Treasury yield. We sit on a 170 handle right now, down another basis point. The 10-year bund yield lower by a basis point at -36, and the 10-year gilt yield down a basis point on a 66 handle. So it is interesting because European equities slight outlier here in terms of the green on the screen, because we saw a sell-off in Asia also. So overall, you'd say cross-asset, there's a little bit of risk-off sentiment. That's also reflected by the fact that the yen is the best-performing G10 currency right now against the dollar. Taking a look at dollar-yen, where we're seeing that trade is at 108.50, down 0.1% on dollar-yen. Earlier, it was the Aussie, or rather yesterday, it was the Aussie outperforming. It's down today after 2 days of gains, and that weakness in the Aussie dollar really reflecting the worse-than-expected GDP data and the bets on rate cuts. The market really eyeing February 2020 for that rate cut from the RBA. And finally, of course, we're still looking ahead to OPEC Plus, Roger. We've had more commentary from Iraq in terms of deepening the output cuts, but really does seem to be a lot of disagreement there. And in terms of the oil price, it's been looking a little bit firmer today.
Right, and meetings everywhere, actually, because you've got the finance minister meeting going on in Europe as well, and obviously COP25 going on in Madrid. We're keeping a close eye, of course, on what's going on with the NATO meeting. We'll bring you any breaking lines that come as the leaders gather there in Watford, which is, of course, just north of London. Right, let's have a look on what stocks there are to watch this morning. Bloomberg stocks reporter Joe Easton has joined us in our London studio. Joe, good morning. Elior, the French catering company, tell us about that.
Yes, good morning. So Elior is surging today. Those shares are up around 9% this morning. This is after the company predicted a new organic growth margin of around a 10 basis point improvement in the coming 2 years. So they should see organic growth up around 2%, they're saying. And analysts are saying that this surprisingly positive update is underpinning the company's dividend. And I'm seeing a note from Citi saying they see some perhaps more share buybacks coming because of this update. So as I mentioned, Elior, the French catering and concessions company, is up around 9%. And this could be another boost for other peers like Compass, the big UK company. So we'll be keeping an eye on those shares as well. Elior's share is really jumping this morning.
Meanwhile, Orange sets profit goals for 2021 to 2023.
That's right. So Orange shares still in France, but going the other way, down around 3.5%. This is as the company predicted a new EBITDA growth outlook of 2 to 3% for 21 to 23. So that's quite positive. They also say, as you mentioned, they're going to seeking these alongside the profit goal. They're going to seek some tower sales for some of their infrastructure. They're going to look to sell. However, the stock falling, and I'm seeing commentary from analysts saying they really don't know how to value these assets, so it's very difficult to say what sort of money will come in for these infrastructure and tower assets from Orange. So as such, Orange shares falling 3.5%, those sales taking focus away from the margins.
And finally, M&C Saatchi, a bit of a warning there.
That's right. So this stock is down 47% today. This is M&C Saatchi, which is obviously the very well-known advertising agency that's been around in London for a long time. It's got a very small market cap, so it's only around £250 million before the open today. They're saying that adjusted pre-tax profit will be significantly below expectations. This is largely due to weakening in the UK ad market, partly due to Brexit, which has also weighed on other companies like WPP. That stock is plunging by, as I mentioned, 47% for M&C Saatchi.
Okay, Jed, thanks very much indeed. Joe Easton there joining us with Stocks to Watch this morning.
Let's turn to our top stories then. And after a 20-month-long dispute between the US and China over trade, another growing risk to a deal, US lawmakers have approved legislation to sanction Chinese officials over human rights abuses against Muslim minorities. Bloomberg's Selena Wang says China has threatened to retaliate.
Ahead of the vote, Chinese state media warned that the government could release a list of unreliable entities that may lead to sanctions against U.S. companies. The Xinjiang bill also follows legislation supporting Hong Kong protesters that was signed into law last week by President Donald Trump. The legislative moves threaten to disrupt trade talks as a mid-December deadline approaches for new U.S. tariffs to take effect on Chinese goods. We also heard from Hu Xijing, the editor-in-chief of Communist Party's Global Times newspaper, tweeting that the bill was a paper tiger with no special leverage to affect Xinjiang, and warned that American politicians with stakes in China should be careful. In Beijing, I'm Selena Wang, Bloomberg Daybreak Europe.
Yeah, and with really what you could call a flurry of trade threats across 3 continents in the span of 24 hours, Roger, President Trump, as we were saying at the top of the show, reminding markets that he's comfortable heading into an election year using tariffs as his main source of international economic leverage. So what he said to reporters in London on Tuesday is, I don't have a deadline. I like the idea of waiting until after the election for the China deal, but they want to make a deal now, and we'll see whether or not the deal is going to be right.
Another front in the trade war has been the US warning other countries not to buy 5G equipment from the Chinese telecom equipment makers. And now Washington's putting some effort behind some money behind that effort. From more, Bloomberg's Delise Pellegrini.
A new agency called the U.S. International Development Finance Corporation plans to tap some of its $60 billion budget for this effort. The money will go to help developing countries and businesses purchase equipment from countries other than China. The DFC's budget is more than twice the size of its predecessor. In addition to providing loans and loan guarantees, it can actually take minority stakes in companies. And the head of the agency says the DFC could also become a founding investor in a new tech infrastructure fund that would back emerging companies in 5G, artificial intelligence, and quantum computing. Denise Pellegrini, Bloomberg, Daybreak Europe.
In London, NATO's surprise champion is President Donald Trump. He's hit out at French President Emmanuel Macron over what he called dangerous and nasty demands for reform. Trump was also especially vocal on the level of defense spending among US allies, with the two having a tense exchange.
So in terms of cost sharing, we are investing 1.9% of our GDP. We are increasing our GDP. But when we speak about NATO, it's not just about money. We have to be respectful with our soldiers. The first burden we share, the first cost we pay is our soldiers' life.
That was French President Emmanuel Macron. Now, in the past, Trump has questioned whether the US should remain in NATO. Now he's crediting himself with strengthening it.
And we are keeping an eye on the arrivals at the NATO leaders meeting at Watford, which is getting underway in the next hour or so. We've seen Boris Johnson arrive, Mark Rutte from the Netherlands arrive. We've seen a helicopter land, which could very well be the arrival of Donald Trump. We'll keep you posted on that. Meanwhile, OPEC and its independent allies are sending mixed signals about production curbs as they prepare to meet in Vienna. The Iraqi oil minister Tamir al-Ghadban has reiterated the Iraqi view that the group should deepen output curbs by 400,000 barrels a day, saying he believes Saudi Arabia supports the idea.
The focus is on this specific scenario. Okay, additional 400,000 barrels per day cuts. All member countries should share. Nobody should take the burden.
However, an earlier meeting of a committee that advises oil ministers wound up without any discussions of new restrictions.
Yeah, so certainly getting some mixed signals from OPEC Plus, Roger. In the meantime, we are seeing the oil price remain a little firmer ahead of that meeting. And finally, in top corporate news, Google founders Larry Page and Sergey Brin are stepping down as leaders of parent company Alphabet. They'll end their day-to-day involvement, but will still be controlling shareholders and will remain on the board. Google CEO Sundar Pichai will be elevated to become the head of Alphabet as well. The news gave shares a boost in extended trade.
Right, let's get the latest in global news now with Leanne Gerrans. Leanne, good morning.
Roger, good morning. Let's start in the US. An inquiry has concluded there is overwhelming evidence the US president abused his power. Donald Trump has always denied putting pressure on Ukraine to get information on the son of his political rival, Joe Biden. The conclusions would form a basis of any formal charges against Trump if a process continues to try to remove him from office. Liz Cheney from the President Republicans Party says the opposition simply hasn't made a solid case.
Despite the fact that the Speaker of the House said that the evidence, if we're going to move forward on impeachment, needs to be clear, compelling, and bipartisan, the Democrats fail on every single one of those counts.
Japan's parliament has approved a trade pact with the US that opens the country's markets to American beef and other agricultural products. That's as Tokyo tries to thwart a threat from President Donald Trump to impose new tariffs on its lucrative car exports. Bloomberg's John Hershkovitz has more.
The deal was approved by Japan's upper house on Wednesday, clearing a final legislative hurdle. The U.S. has been pressing for the agreement to come into force by January 1, which could help Trump land votes in his 2020 re-election campaign in agricultural areas hit by his trade war with China that may benefit from the deal with Tokyo. In Tokyo, John Hershkovitz, Bloomberg Daybreak Europe.
President Trump has revived his Rocket Man nickname for Kim Jong-un and the threat of military force against North Korea. He revisited the name he once used to mock Kim just hours after Pyongyang says it was preparing what it called a Christmas message for America. That's if the administration fails to meet its year-end demand for concessions in nuclear talks. And Iran has admitted security forces have shot and killed protesters during recent unrest across the country, describing the victims as rioters. State media reported on widespread clashes over a rise in gas prices. Tehran is facing growing international criticism. Global news 24 hours a day, on air and on Quick Take by Bloomberg, powered by more than 2,700 journalists and analysts in more than 120 countries. I'm Leanne Gerrans. This is Bloomberg Naira.
Thanks, Leanne. Still ahead on Bloomberg Daybreak Europe, we'll talk about the roadblocks to US-China talks. This is Bloomberg.
Have you wanted to speak a new language, but you thought it'd be too hard or take too much time? Then go to Babbel.com, download the app, and try it for free. In just 15 minutes a day, you'll be on your way to speaking a new language in just a few weeks. And right now, you can try Babbel for free. Babbel starts out teaching you words and phrases by matching them with pictures. You won't believe how easy the interactive program is. Soon the sentences get a little bigger, and before you know it, you're having simulated conversations voiced by native speakers. And because Babbel is crafted by language experts and uses the spaced repetition method, in just 10 to 15 minutes a day, you'll be speaking the language with real confidence. With Babbel, you can speak a language. Just go to Babbel.com and start your first lesson in the language of your choice for free. Download the Babbel app or go to Babbel.com and try it for free. That's Babbel.com.
Portfolio Analyst, powered by Interactive Broker. Helps sophisticated investors understand the health of their complete financial portfolio. Portfolio Analyst is free and easy-to-use personal finance software that creates a consolidated view of banking, brokerage, and credit card accounts. Compare your consolidated portfolio against more than 200 benchmarks or create customized benchmarks for analyzing performance. Calculate time and money-weighted rates of return and use Portfolio Analyst for forecasting. Sign up for free at portfolioanalyst.com.
Welcome back to the Dog Show. Up next, we have Satchmo. Satchmo is a member of the Shelter Pet Group.
That's right, a group known especially for their couch snuggling, ball chasing, face licking, and of course companionship. Now let's see him in action.
Look how he makes eye contact with his person.
That's actually known as the treat stare.
How intuitive, and now he appears to be excitedly turning in circles.
The happy dance will come in with this group.
But really, the best way to know an amazing shelter pet like Satchmo is to meet one.
Visit theshelterpetproject.org today. Adopt.
Brought to you by Maddie's Fund, the Humane Society of the United States, and the Ad Council.
Influential conversations from Bloomberg Television.
Here's Sherry Ann.
The Trump administration has been looking at Chinese tech as a national security threat for some time now, and is focused on companies like Huawei, ZTE, and TikTok. To that end, a new U.S. agency has a $60 billion budget to help developing countries and businesses find alternatives to companies like Huawei and ZTE. Joining us now from Washington is Robert Strayer, the State Department Deputy Assistant Secretary for Cyber and International Communications and Information Policy. Ambassador, thank you so much for your time today. Now, this latest approach seems to be the carrot approach, where you're trying to convince these developing nations to stay away from cheaper Chinese tech. Is this an acknowledgement that perhaps the stick is not working?
Well, for some time, we've sought to work with developing countries to ensure that they can have reliable and secure communications technology. So this isn't a different approach to the matter. Independently, we're also working with partners and allies to educate them about the risks of 5G, that there can be the potential for vendors of 5G to be under control of another government that would require them to take actions that are not in their citizens' interests. And that's particularly the case in countries like China, where there's no independent judiciary or rule of law for a company to object to be made to take actions in line with their intelligence and security services.
Hear more interviews like this one on Bloomberg Television, streaming live on Bloomberg.com and on the Bloomberg mobile app, or check your local cable listings.
Markets, headlines and breaking news 24 hours a day at Bloomberg.com, the Bloomberg Business app and on QuickTake by Bloomberg. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
From Bloomberg's European headquarters in London, I'm Roger Hearing. Time for a Bloomberg Radio Business Flash. Now over to the first word breaking news desk in Berlin for today's morning call. Here's Richard Jones. Richard, good morning.
Good morning, Roger. We're seeing broad-based declines in Asian equities today, with the Nikkei 225 and Hang Seng both down by over 1%, and the Kospi down 0.75%, while the Shanghai Composite is down 0.25%. U.S. equity futures are trading lower too, with the E-mini S&P and E-mini Nasdaq futures both down by 0.2. European equities are opening mixed, with the Euro Stoxx 50, DAX, and CAC 40 all up by about 1 to 0.2%, while the FTSE is down by about 0.2. Looking at the sector breakdown in Europe, gains are being led by technology, financial services, and construction materials, while losses are being led by telecoms. Turning to bond markets, the U.S. 10-year yield is 1 basis point lower at 1.71% after yesterday's 10 basis point decline. The 10-year German bond yield is also a basis point lower at minus 0.36%. In the FX space, the Bloomberg Dollar Index is little changed, with the Japanese yen and Swiss franc up slightly versus the greenback on haven demand, and the Aussie dollar leading the G10 laggards. It's PMI day today in Europe. We've just had Spain services and composite measures out, both stronger than expected. We'll also get services and composite readings out of Italy, France, Spain, and the Eurozone, and also the UK. In terms of central bank speakers, we get the ECB's Villeroy, Visco, McLouf, and Hernandez to cost today. That's it for me. For more macro breaking news, it's SQUA Go on the Bloomberg terminal. Roger?
Richard, that's a Bloomberg Business Flash. Now here's Leanne Gerrans with more on what's going on around the world. Leanne.
Roger, good morning. Let's start here in the UK. The Conservatives are promising to ramp up anti-terrorism protection if they win next week's election. Following the attack at London Bridge, the Prime Minister wants public venues to prepare in the same way they would for a fire. Labour's Shadow Chancellor John McDonnell will give a speech on the economy later. Rents in prime shopping districts in Hong Kong will fall sharply next year, according to property agency Knight Frank is predicting reductions of at least 15% for street shop spaces in key areas as retail sales plunge amid ongoing protests. Street-level outlets in Causeway Bay charge the highest rents in the world in the third quarter, beating Bond Street here in London. And Peloton stock is taking a hit after an online backlash over its holiday ad. It depicts a woman showing a video diary of her time on the Peloton bike, but critics have described it as sexist, saying it seemed like the woman was being pressured to keep her weight in check. No comment from Peloton. Global News 24 hours a day, on air and on QuickTake by Bloomberg, powered by more than 2,700 journalists and analysts in more than 120 countries. I'm Leanne Gerrans. This is Bloomberg in Naira.
Leanne, thank you so much. Now, the U.S. House of Representatives has approved legislation that would impose sanctions on Chinese officials over human rights abuses against Muslim minorities. That prompted Beijing to threaten possible retaliation just as the world's two largest economies seek to close a trade deal. For more, let's go live to Singapore, where Bloomberg opinion editor Rachel Rosenthal is standing by. Rachel, great to have you with us. How likely is it that these talks between the US and China are now going to get pushed into 2020, especially as President Trump says, whether we believe him or not, that he doesn't have a deadline?
Well, that's a great question. Thanks so much for having me. I think we are looking like things are stalled. I think there was a lot of expectations that we would be nearing the December 15th deadline, and having a trade deal really already banked in the cards. But now there's been a couple of hurdles that have been thrown up. I think, first of all, you've got what most immediately this bill that was passed in the U.S. House of Representatives about the human rights abuses against Uyghurs. That's a Muslim minority living in the Western region of China. This bill passed 407-1. That comes closely on the heels of another bill that was passed that Trump just signed last week that supports Hong Kong protesters. Also got overwhelming support from both parties. As an American, let me tell you that this level of bipartisan support is nothing short of a Christmas miracle. And then, I've got to say that on the Chinese side, I think it's been a little bit less clear about how they're going to retaliate. Some of the measures that they've put forward could end up delaying things, but some of these things that they've put forward don't seem all that intimidating yet. The most pressing thing is this unreliable entities list, which could end up putting sanctions on companies like FedEx.
Yeah, I mean, Rachel, it's interesting. The Ministry of Foreign Affairs this morning saying that the US will pay a price over both the Hong Kong and the Xinjiang bill. I mean, how should investors read this going forward then? I mean, is it likely there will be firm action?
Sure. So I think in the short term, it's not looking great. Look, today in Asia, Hong Kong and Australia took big hits. I think in Europe, things are mixed and U.S. futures are up slightly. But I think it's really important to consider that investors were positioning for some kind of deal to get through by December 15th. Just days ago, we were setting fresh records for the S&P on a daily basis. And I think the other thing that's really important to keep in mind is we shouldn't underestimate just how much the idea that a deal would get through were getting baked into other gauges of the U.S. economy, namely consumer confidence. Shoppers have been a key pillar for the strength of the U.S. economy. Black Friday and Cyber Monday have been setting records. You take these things away, and things are starting to look a lot more wobbly. And I think we have to remember that the base case scenario for a lot of investors going into 2020 was that things would get done. So if that goes away, then all bets are off, kind of.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right, Michelle. And also, what's at the forefront of investors' minds is December 15th and what could happen even if phase one doesn't get done. Would President Trump still perhaps delay those December 15th tariffs even if there isn't a phase one?
I'll be honest. I think putting through tariffs on toys, iPods, and children's clothing on December 15th is just a bad look for Donald Trump. I mean, those bad headlines write themselves. I don't know if you've done your Christmas shopping. I certainly haven't. But I don't think Donald Trump is going to want to put tariffs on those types of items right at December 15th. So I think the danger you get into here really is, what does a phase one really look like? I mean, we started the trade war with this idea that there were a comprehensive set of grievances that the U.S. wanted to address with China. Then that got neutered into a phase one and a phase two. The phase one, as it was, even before all this stuff happened over the course of the past week, it already didn't address key issues such as industrial subsidies and forced technology transfer. If he comes to the table now and gets and puts a even more watered down phase one, I don't know what investors are really left with.
All right, Rachel, thanks very much indeed. Rachel Rosenthal there, Bloomberg opinion editor, live on the line from Singapore. And it does look as if, Nahira, that the chances of any kind of deal in the foreseeable future almost seem to be receding. I mean, obviously, things can happen with Donald Trump, as we know.
Yeah, and as an equity investor, then you've got to ask yourself going into year end, do you want to take some of that equity risk off the table, or actually do you want to buy on the dips if you do see something happening in Q1 of 2020? The Stock 600 actually rebounding a little after 4 days of declines, up 0.3%, diverging from what we saw in the Asian session. This is Bloomberg.
This is a Bloomberg Market Minute. Wall Street today will try to put an end to its 3-session losing streak. The market is coming off a sharp sell-off yesterday after President Trump dashed hopes for a U.S.-China trade deal anytime soon. But Ryan Dietrich at LPL Financial says the pullback may still have further to go.
We're having a well-deserved little correction here, and this could even go a little further. Don't forget, the first half of December historically is a little weak, and then Santa Claus comes to town.
We begin the run-up this morning to Friday's November employment report as payroll processor ADP releases its monthly data on private sector hiring. And the Institute for Supply Management will have its monthly look at business conditions in the service sector, a slight decline as expected. Campbell's Soup will report its quarterly earnings today. Analysts are expecting stable soup sales and improving snack sales. H&R Block and retailer Five Below will also open their books. Larry Kofsky, Bloomberg Radio.
Are you interested in a challenging and exciting career? One where you can be part of solving complex challenges across industries and geographies? Bloomberg's ever-expanding technology, data, news, and media services foster innovation, empower clients, and offer nearly limitless opportunities for career growth. Visit Bloomberg.com/careers today to view our current job opportunities. Bloomberg LP is an equal opportunity employer. The address once again is Bloomberg.com/careers.
GEP, Strategy, Software, Managed Services. Hundreds of Fortune 500 and Global 2000 companies work with GEP to transform their procurement and supply chain operations. Because GEP brings it all together. Software? The Smart by GEP digital procurement platform is amazing. Strategy? Tops in the industry. Change management? GEP is consistently ranked among the very best. GEP, helping the world's best companies do better.
Great music gets people moving. So here's the perfect gift for someone who's always on the go. The highly portable, special edition Bose SoundLink Mini Bluetooth speaker. Now only $149 in the Black Tag gift event at Curry's PC World. Big sound, deep bass, and 6 months free Spotify for great music right through from the Christmas party to the beach party season. Make anyone's Christmas at Curry's PC World. T's apply.
At Asda this Christmas, treat them to a gift or two, or three, with 3 for 2 on a wide range of beauty and toiletry gift sets from Dove, Lynx, Bayliss and Harding and many more. Asda, let's make Christmas extra special. Selected stores and lines subject to availability. Individual prices £1 to £20. Cheapest item free.
Rainy, 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 rainy.
Sergey, why are you in such good mood?
It's raining.
And?
Rain means we take mere pups to cinema. And cinema means they'll be entertained.
Ah, and entertained means they're also quiet for a couple of hours. Oh, let's go. Enjoy more time together with 2-for-1 cinema tickets from Meerkat Movies with the Meerkat app. When you buy, so compare the markup. Qualifying purchases, chooses the Wednesdays, participating cinemas, 2 standard tickets only, cheapest free. T's and C's apply.
As the impeachment inquiry moves on to the next level, the House Judiciary Committee is holding its first hearings to decide whether to draft 4 more articles of impeachment.
Impeachment inquiry into Donald J. Trump, the 45th President of the United States. Trump did not give an expletive about Ukraine.
Listen today to hear an expert panel discuss the grounds for presidential impeachment and whether President Trump's actions in the Ukraine scandal are in fact impeachable. Search Impeachment News on TuneIn to listen.
When you're not listening to your team, take it to the end zone, the rim, or the net. Keep up with the biggest moments in sports by following TuneIn on social media.
Block, Cook into the end zone for the touchdown.
From reminders of the live top games to tips of the best sports stations and podcasts.
Welcome to Undisputed. We are live from Los Angeles. I'm Jenny Taft here with Skip Bayless.
Follow and TuneIn on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram to get the most out of TuneIn. The puck drops. 12 players face off to win. The suspense is pure torture, but you wouldn't miss this for the world. TuneIn brings you every minute of the NHL season. Listen live to hockey when it matters most on TuneIn.
Broadcasting live to London on DAB digital radio, to New York, Bloomberg 1130, to Washington DC, Bloomberg 99.1, to Boston, Bloomberg 106.1, to San Francisco, Bloomberg 960, and around the globe, the Bloomberg Business app and BloombergRadio.com. This is Bloomberg Daybreak Europe.
8:30 a.m. in London, 9:30 if you're listening in Paris, Frankfurt or Brussels. Good morning, everyone. I'm Naira Chahich.
And I'm Roger Hearing, and you're listening to Bloomberg Daybreak Europe.
Or if you're listening in Watford, Roger, because we're both looking at pictures of arrivals at the NATO summit. Justin Trudeau, a Canadian Prime Minister, just walking in, and the autumnal colours looking really beautiful in Hertfordshire, I have to say.
You've got a very low sun shining through the trees there. I mean, it's looking pretty good. I have to say, Watford doesn't always have the best reputation, but it looks nice from here.
Yeah, who says you can't paint paint a picture on radio. Let's paint a picture of the markets 30 minutes into the equity market open here in Europe. And I want to highlight cable up for a fourth day, popping through 130.33, up 0.4%, reaching the highest level in almost 7 months, actually, as traders are kind of stepping up bets on a win for the Conservatives in the election, because we've had some polls showing Tories holding their lead over Labour, and also arguably sterling getting a bit of a lift as US President Donald Trump's visit to the UK for NATO has unfolded comparatively smoothly, so defying some of the speculation that his presence could undermine Boris Johnson. Elsewhere in the markets, if we look at the equity market in Europe, 31 minutes into the equity market open, we are bouncing back a little from 4 days of declines, up 0.4% on the Stock 600. Across regional equity benchmarks, the FTSE 100 is flat. A stronger pound certainly won't do much to help the FTSE 100 this session. The CAC 40 up 0.5%. The DAX higher by 0.4%. The IBEX and FTSE MIB in the green. US futures, though, showing a bit of a different picture. They're coming off the lows from earlier, but NASDAQ futures down 0.1%. Same for Dow futures. S&P futures also weaker by 0.1% after we saw a third day of declines for US equities for the S&P 500 yesterday. We also saw a lot of red on the screen in Asia. Concern in markets as President Donald Trump said he doesn't have a deadline for a deal with China. And that concern was reflected in bond markets yesterday as well, as yields dropped significantly both in the US and Europe. We steady up a bit today right now. We were declining earlier on yields, but the 10-year Treasury yield is steady on a 171 handle. The 10-year Bund yield goes nowhere at negative 36. 10-year gilt yield on a 67 handle. Dollar yen, though, earlier we were seeing the yen somewhat bid, and it was one of the best performing G10. Dollar yen still down 0.1%, 108.48. I've already covered cable, but in terms of the downside in G10, it's the Aussie dollar that's been underperforming, and that after we had weaker than expected GDP data, perhaps fueling those bets for rate cuts from the RBA. Traders really eyeing February 2020 for that rate cut. So the Aussie underperforming after 2 days of strength. And as we head to OPEC Plus, and we get a little bit of sort of jarring mixed messages from the OPEC Plus committee, with Iraq still talking about deepening output cuts, although others saying that won't be the case. We're seeing oil stay a little firm in this session, Roger.
Right, let's keep an eye on our top stories. Another possible roadblock to a phase one trade deal. The US House of Representatives has passed legislation imposing sanctions on Chinese officials over human rights abuses against Muslims. The bill's in support of the Uyghurs from the Xinjiang region. China's vowed unspecified retaliation if the bill goes any further.
And OPEC Plus is sending mixed signals about output. Iraq's oil minister has reiterated his view that the cartel should deepen its cuts. He says he believes Saudi Arabia also supports the move, but an earlier technical meeting ended without any discussion. Backs.
Yeah, currently WTI is up 0.5%. It's $56.42 a barrel. Brent crude 61.24. the barrel. That's 7 tenths. So quite a bit of movement going on there. Now, let's move on to other stories. Alphabet, the Google founders, Larry Page and Sergey Brin, are stepping down from their roles as CEO and president of the parent Alphabet. More from Bloomberg's Charlie Pellet.
Sundar Pichai, the CEO of Google, will also be the CEO of Alphabet. Both Page and Brin, the major shareholders, will remain on the company board. In a statement, Page and Brin wrote, quote, "We are deeply committed to Google and Alphabet for the long term and will remain actively involved as board members, shareholders, and co-founders." They go on to say the quote, "In addition, we plan to continue talking with Sundar regularly, especially on topics we're passionate about." Charlie Pellet, Bloomberg Daybreak Europe.
And euro area finance ministers will today discuss outstanding issues in reforming the euro. Bloomberg's Victoria Dendrenou says the hope is to finalise a long-debated deal by the end of the year.
Their meeting was meant to be the occasion to break a long-standing deadlock on the contentious issue of common deposit insurance and to sign off on the reform of the euro area bailout fund. Instead, thanks to coalition tremors in Germany and Italy, two of the region's largest economies, both of these ambitions now look uncertain. In Brussels, Victoria Dendrenou, Bloomberg Daybreak Europe.
But of course, there's another meeting closer to home going on at the moment. NATO leaders gathering at Watford outside London. On day one, Donald Trump and Emmanuel Macron sparred over tariffs, Turkey and terrorism.
NATO's becoming different than it was, much bigger than it was, and much stronger than it was because people are now fulfilling their commitments. There are some countries that aren't fulfilling their commitment, and those countries are going to be dealt with. Maybe I'll deal with them from a trade standpoint. Maybe I'll deal with them in a different way. I'll work something out where they have to pay. But, we don't want to have people delinquent.
Well, for more, let's go live to the NATO summit in Watford, where Bloomberg's Maria Tadeo is standing by. Maria, we've seen arrivals so far. We've seen Boris Johnson, of course, Justin Trudeau from Canada. But, of course, a lot of focus is going to be on Emmanuel Macron and Donald Trump, of course, not least after their apparent spat there. I mean, how would you characterize relations between the US and France, not least, of course, because of these tariffs that are being put on in terms of French goods?
Good morning. So we just found out Emmanuel Macron is actually not going to be speaking in a doorstep this morning. And we also had Justin Trudeau, now that you mentioned him, also skipping his doorstep because there's a little bit of gossip here. There's a video that's doing the rounds in which he is criticizing a leader that he doesn't name. And that is a video that everyone is really talking about here on the ground. In terms of the Trump-Macron situation, we heard the language yesterday. It was very tough language from Trump to Macron, saying he had been insulting, disrespectful towards NATO. The two then try to ease some of that tension, saying they had a good meeting. They also said that perhaps they can find a way around that digital tax, which the U.S. has said they are not going to allow, that they will tax French products in retaliation. But there's still many open question marks here in terms of the summit today. We don't know what their position on China is going to be. We don't know whether we're going to see an agreement on Turkey. And again, we don't really know what the Europeans are thinking with regards to the European role within NATO.
Yeah, and it's interesting, Maria. I'm following all the updates on the Bloomberg, and Trump and Macron may have had a public spat, but apparently Trump gave Macron and Italian Prime Minister Giuseppe Conte a ride to Johnson's residence. So the feeling from French officials, as we understand, is that the mood in the room behind the cameras was excellent. And what's interesting is that this time around, President Trump has made a little bit of a U-turn in terms of his view on NATO. I was noticing that China is on the official agenda for the first time. You wonder whether his tone has anything to do with that, given that there's also the US-China talks in the background.
Right, and then two things. French officials, going back to your point, did also say that they view this as normal, that type of confrontation, because in their eyes, Trump needs to reach out to his domestic audience, and Emmanuel Macron needs to be seen as tough to his French audience. So then you can see why they were fine with the language. In terms of that U-turn from Donald Trump, you're very right. He used to say this was obsolete. He used to say the U.S. would simply not pay up to protect rich countries. Yesterday, it was all really nice words. He said that NATO is really working, that he was very happy with it, also taking credit for that increase in spending. It is interesting that NATO is just letting him take all the credit. Perhaps they just want to keep him happy, but also Trump today does not want to have too many open fronts. He already has China that he is very much targeting, and one of the things the U.S. would love is for NATO to change its language when it comes to China, to say it's a much bigger threat than they normally would say it is, and that fits into the U.S. narrative.
Indeed. Maria, thanks very much indeed. Maria, today they're live on the line from Watford, where the leaders are now arriving for that NATO leaders meeting. Mustn't call it a summit, apparently, because there's no communique. Anyway, let's get all the latest world news now from Leanne Gerrans. Leanne, good morning.
Roger, good morning. Let's start in the US, where President Trump has been accused of abusing his power, intimidating witnesses, and obstructing an inquiry. The committee's released a report after looking into claims he pressured Ukraine to investigate a political rival. Donald Trump rejects that and calls the investigation a witch hunt. The committee chair, Adam Schiff, says he acted improperly.
He was willing to sacrifice the national security of the United States by withholding military aid and diplomatic recognition in the form of that White House meeting in order to get what he wanted.
Another committee will now start to consider formal charges that will happen later. Elsewhere, US President Donald Trump revived his nickname for the North Korean leader, calling him Rocket Man at a NATO summit which is happening here in London. Bloomberg's Ji Haley has more.
It's safe to say things have made a full circle after Donald Trump and Kim Jong-un went back to old habits, even after their meeting in Singapore and Hanoi. Kim has been resuming his short-range ballistic missile launches, and Trump now going back to applying pressure on Kim, even hinting at using military force against North Korea if they, quote, have to. In Seoul, Ji Haley, Bloomberg Daybreak Europe.
And global carbon emissions have risen again across the last 12 months, but researchers say it's happened more slowly than in the previous 2 years. Scientists think levels of pollution aren't rising at the same pace, partly because of falling coal use in the European Union and in the US. Global news 24 hours a day on air, and a quick take-up by Bloomberg, powered by more than 2,700 journalists and analysts in more than 120 countries. I'm Leanne Gerrans. This is Bloomberg.
If you love them enough to listen to them practice the same song on tuba, please be done. Over and over and over and over and over, then surely you'll check NHTSA.gov/the right seat to make sure they're correctly buckled in the back seat.
Sounds good, honey.
Check today at NHTSA.gov/the right seat. Brought to you by the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration and the Ad Council.
In today's volatile markets, investors need resilient portfolios to help handle the pressure. Through decades of expansions and recessions and changing interest rates, clients have turned to PIMCO to help them stay on course, no matter what course markets take. PIMCO, active fixed income solutions that aim to give investors an edge. All investments contain risk and may lose value. Investing in the bond market is subject to risks. Consult your investment professional prior to making an investment decision.
Startups and research universities, New Jersey Institute of Technology, are fueling the innovation economy. And few people are better positioned to see what's on the horizon in New Jersey than physicist and state representative Andrew Zwicker.
How technology is transforming our financial sector is revolutionary, and so much of that is in New Jersey. We are innovators when it comes to agriculture, and there is opportunity now for great transformation in how are we going to grow food in an ever-growing population, and how do we turn urban centers into agricultural centers. Autonomous vehicles is another one where we have some of the world's leading experts, and how this will transform how those who are either elderly or are visually impaired or mobily impaired can start to use autonomous vehicles to transform their lives and have access to transportation they could have never had before.
NJIT, New Jersey Institute of Technology. Learn more at njit.edu/research.
At TradePoint, we know that big jobs can mean a big shop around. We've a wide range of products from kitchens to plumbing to electrical or timber, so you can get it all in one place, 7 days a week, making big jobs smaller. So, for all you need, when you need it, get to TradePoint or go to tradepoint.co.uk.
As the impeachment inquiry moves on to the next level, the House Judiciary Committee is holding its first hearings to decide whether to draft formal articles of impeachment.
Impeachment inquiry into Donald J. Trump, the 45th President of the United States. Trump did not give an expletive about Ukraine.
Listen today to hear an expert panel discuss the grounds for presidential impeachment and whether President Trump's actions in the Ukraine scandal are in fact impeachable. Search Impeachment News on TuneIn to listen.
Far wing elevates, triple bucket.
The war of the crowd. The shot clock ticks down. Will the ball go in? The suspense is pure torture, but you wouldn't miss this for the world. And the replays just don't cut
to
it.
The sideline, the man leads for three.
TuneIn Premium brings you every minute of the NBA season streaming live, so you can be there when it matters most. Hear it now. Hear it live on TuneIn.
Pump fake in the lane, turnaround jumper from 8 feet is good on the
Search
right block.
NBA Today to start listening.
Along the goal line, Martin scores and takes it home.
Hockey fans, the 2019-20 NHL season is here.
Here's Pietrangelo, he scores!
And you can hear the action live on TuneIn Premium.
Gonna move, hit a shot, he scores!
From regular season action to the All-Star Game and through the Stanley Cup in June. Hear the home and away call for every game, for every team live. At home or on the go, never miss a game with the NHL on TuneIn Premium.
Upgrade today.
Hey, NFL fan, can't watch the game? Can't be there? No biggie. With your TuneIn Premium membership, you already have an all-access pass to every team and every game in the league. Amazing, right?
Steps up, floats it towards, at the goal line, it's intercepted!
Listen live as the action unfolds or on demand when you can. Anytime, anywhere, all season long.
Right side, it is caught, it is in for the right side for the touchdown to Keenan.
Search NFL today.
Did you know your favorite radio stations are in your pocket? Yes, the TuneIn app lets you listen to the same radio stations you pick up on your home or car radio anywhere you want. To see all the stations broadcasting in your area, find the local radio section on the home screen. Keep it local with TuneIn.
From ESPN and the award-winning producers of The Sterling Affairs comes the latest season of 30 for 30 podcasts. 4 brand new stories of espionage.
He wanted this team to be the Barcelona of women's basketball.
Resilience.
I started to scream. I tried to get away.
Corruption.
It's the culture of win at all costs.
And rebirth.
How will we ever rebuild it?
30 for 30 Podcasts, Season 6. Listen now to 30 for 30 Podcasts on TuneIn.
This is not a commercial. This is a reminder. With TuneIn Premium, you could be listening to more music commercial-free. Get over 45 commercial-free music stations. Visit TuneIn.com/premium to upgrade.
When you're not listening to your team, take it to the end zone, the rim, or the net. Keep up with the biggest moments in sports by following TuneIn on social media.
Block, Cook into the end zone for the touchdown.
From reminders of the live top games to tips of the best sports stations and podcasts.
Welcome to Undisputed. We are live from Los Angeles. I'm Jenny Taft here with Skip
Follow
Bayless.
at TuneIn on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram to get the most out of TuneIn.
Don't want to miss a second of your NFL team's next matchup? Let TuneIn remind you. Just make sure notifications are enabled on your phone and search for your team profile on the TuneIn app. Then, find the game you want under events and tap Notify Me. We'll send you an alert as soon as live coverage begins.
It's headlines and breaking news 24 hours a day at Bloomberg.com, the Bloomberg Business app, and on QuickTake by Bloomberg. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
From Bloomberg's European headquarters in London, I'm Roger Hearing with this Bloomberg Radio Business Flash. And the European session seems to be a lot more positive than the Asian session, which was very risk-off because of those renewed tensions between Washington and Beijing. Right now, the stock 600 up 0.4%. Stocks 50 up 0.5%. The CAC and the DAX both up 0.5% at the moment. The IBEX up 0.6%. The only outlier there, of course, being FTSE 100, which is down 0.1% at the moment, possibly in relation to the fact that cable has now gone past the 1.3 mark. That seems to have changed quite a lot. We're also seeing some strength in haven currencies there, of course, the yen 108.48 at the moment. We've also seen some movement in the US 10-year treasuries at the moment, hanging around the 1.71 handle. The other thing to keep an eye on, of course, with OPEC meeting in Vienna this week is oil. Currently WTI $56.44 the barrel. That's up 0.6%. Brent crude $61.24 the barrel, up 0.7%. All that possibly on the basis of the Iraqis pushing for further production cuts, though we've seen that seems to be an unlikely outcome. Now, it's a business flash. Now here's Leanne Gerrans with more on what's going on. Leanne.
Roger, good morning. Iran has admitted security forces have shot and killed protesters during recent unrest across the country, describing the victims as rioters. State media reported on widespread clashes over a rise in gas prices. Tehran is facing growing international criticism for the crackdown on demonstrations that began on November the 15th. Amnesty International says at least 200 people have died. Kamala Harris says she simply didn't have the resources to keep running for president. The senator from California suspended her campaign for the Democratic nomination. She had a strong start that sent her into second place in the polls, but her campaign did fail to catch on. And finally, more than 1,000 Brits are injured every day during the ski season. That's because of drinking on the slopes, according to one of Britain's biggest insurers. Claims data from Direct Line suggests that nearly 400,000 skiers have suffered sprains and almost 300,000 cuts or bruises in crashes well under the influence of booze over the past 5 years. Global news 24 hours a day, on air and on Quick Take by Bloomberg, powered by more than 2,700 journalists and analysts in more than 120 countries. I'm Leanne Gerrans. This is Bloomberg Naira.
Oh my goodness, Leanne, I'm so accident prone. I've never actually been skiing, but I'm pretty sure I would be part of that statistic.
Well, perhaps you should try an experiment.
I'm also a bit like Naira. You are very cruel, Roger.
I've never been skiing either, also because I think I like to drink. And I'd probably do hand in hand, so I'd definitely be one of those statistics.
Did you hear that, Roger? Both of us haven't been skiing.
I haven't been skiing either.
Oh my gosh. We should all go together as a Christmas present.
Yes, let's go.
Never quite see the point of going up a mountain to come down it. But.
Oh, come on, Roger. Why not?
All right. Thank you so much, Leanne Gerrans, with the world news. Now, to get back to a serious note, we do have some PMI data just crossing. France's services PMI coming in at 52.2, so that's weaker than the previous reading and also a touch weaker than expected. The composite PMI coming in at 52.1, again weaker than expected. And just a couple of minutes ago, we also had similar data from Italy, the services PMI falling to 50.4, missing the forecast of 51.2. The composite PMI falling to contractionary territory, 49.6, missing the forecast of 50.6. Michael Hewson is our guest for the rest of the hour, Chief Market Analyst at CMC Markets. Michael, great to have you with us. Hope you've never had any skiing accidents.
Michael makes three, Neera. I haven't been skiing either.
Oh, okay. 4 of us on this holiday then. We'll get onto the PMI data in a moment, but I want to get your thoughts first on the sell-off we saw in equity markets yesterday, recovering a bit in Europe today, which is interesting, given we saw red on the screen in Asia, on the fact that US-China tensions seem to be renewing, the signing of the bill over human rights, but also, of course, President Trump saying, I don't have a deadline. Is this a sell-off that you'd want to buy on, given the pressure that both sides are under to reach some kind of deal?
I think in any other circumstances, Neera, I would be tempted to say yes, but for the fact that we're heading into year end. And I think if you've been buying into this rally on the basis that you're going to get a waiving of the tariffs on the 15th of December and some form of phase 1 trade deal, then you could potentially make the argument for doing that. But I think the game has changed quite significantly. I mean, that was an impromptu press conference yesterday, an impromptu Q&A, and that really, I think, came out of left field. The fact that the president was prepared to wait another year to potentially strike a deal with China. I think everyone had been working on the presumption that we wouldn't get a deal until maybe January, February, something like that. That's certainly the premise that I was working from. So this really, I think, is a game changer, and I think the next deadline, 15th of December, will be key. How the markets react if the US does in fact put tariffs on the 15th of December. And certainly the Chinese pushback that we've seen today suggests they're not really in any mood to compromise either.
Yeah, it's interesting, Mike. I mean, you said it was an impromptu press conference, and he said this, and it changed the game. Is there not a sense that perhaps some of this might be noise, some of this might be off the cuff, and therefore perhaps not strictly what might actually happen? Perhaps a way of perhaps tweaking or tuning the political mood in the US?
Well, yeah, you can certainly tweak the message, but I certainly don't think it changes the dynamics with respect to the relationship between the US and China. What doesn't change is the fact that Trump needs to start a re-election campaign in 2020. And if he strikes a phase one trade deal with China, there's no guarantee that he'll be able to actually get the legislation passed before Congress and the Senate break for the election campaign. Let's not forget, USMCA has still not been passed, despite the fact that the agreement was made over a year ago.
Yeah, Michael, by the way, we are awaiting the arrival of President Donald Trump at the NATO meeting in Watford near London. So just to warn you, we might have to cut in if that happens at any moment and he starts speaking, perhaps impromptu or not, in just a moment. I was just breaking some of the PMI data that we're getting on services and composite for France and Italy. We're awaiting it from Germany as well. A lot of talk about a potential inflection in global growth for 2020. Is that the basis that you're working on as well in terms of your market narrative?
Well, I've actually been struck by the fact that we are seeing a little bit of an improvement in some of the data out of China. I was actually quite surprised by the PMIs that we got out from November, but I'm also constrained by the fact that, all dead cats bounce. And maybe what we're doing here is we're getting a little bit of a rebound into the end of the year. The Chinese PMIs may have been impacted by the fact that they had Singles Day in November, and there may have been an artificial boost there. I think the key for me is whether or not this rebound that we've been seeing in manufacturing holds up into the start of 2020. We've had a good year this year for stock markets, but you've also got to set that in the context of the poor year that we had in 2018. If you actually look at where we were at the beginning of 2018 and where we are now, we're not really that much different. We haven't really gone anywhere. So I think the fact that we're higher today is a little bit of a false narrative.
Now, Mark, what about the British outlook in all this? We've seen slight improvements, manufacturing, construction data this week. We've now got the pound breaking through the 1.3 barrier against the dollar. Where do you think this leads at the moment? Or again, is it just a year-end situation?
I think there's an element of the fact that I think the markets are surmising, rightly or wrongly, that there's little chance of the Labour Party getting a majority. And as such, an awful lot of these short positions that have been building up with stops above 130.20 are now starting to get squeezed. Let's face it, we're only 8 days away from polling. A lot would have to go wrong between now and then for the mathematics of that poll lead to erode to such an extent that we get a Labour government. So I think a lot of the fears of a Labour government are diminishing, and you could actually see some of that play out in a nationalisation discount on some of, say, for example, Royal Mail, BT Group, Centrica, and other utilities in the days and weeks ahead. So I think that's what's happening with the cable. We've broken that 130.20 level, and we could well be heading towards 132 over the course of the rest of the month, assuming, obviously, that we get the outcome we expect.
Right. I'm just going to break the Germany data in terms of the PMIs, Michael. So we've had the services PMI 51.7, an improvement from the prior reading and a slight beat on the estimate. Still contraction on the composite, but we are slightly higher than expected, 49.4, which is interesting because the German number's a little bit better than expected, whereas France and Italy were a little worse. But you were talking about a potential dead cat bounce. On cable, you said that we could get to sort of the low 130s into 2020 then, if we get that Conservative victory, Boris Johnson's Brexit deal, do we push even higher to 136, 137, dare I say higher, or does that start to fade as the negotiations over the actual trade deal happen?
It starts to fade the closer we get to 140. My target for cable has been for us to move back towards that 140 level over the course of the next 1 or 2 years. There's a number of factors at play in my calculations there, notwithstanding the fact that over the last 30 years, the average for cable on the 200-month moving average is around about 160, and we're quite a way away from that. So we generally tend to revert to the mean. So for me, fade towards 140 over the course of the next 12 months.
Thank you so much. Michael Houston, the Chief Market Analyst at CMC Markets, joining us there live on Daybreak Europe. This is Bloomberg.
Are you? I've always loved a kitchen experiment, especially smoothies. I've blended all sorts of mad combinations. Strawberry and charcoal, broccoli and chocolate. Not my best, that. But when I test blenders in the Witch Lab, it's not about flavour, it's about performance. Our tests use proper tough stuff, hard ice, strong veg, rough nuts. And the blenders that can hack it are the only ones we recommend for your kitchen.
Which tests harder so you can buy smarter. Visit which.co.uk.
Dell Cyber Monday for Business is on. Save up to 50% all week across our small business technology and accessories, as well as free delivery and financing offers with low monthly payments. Deals end midnight, Sunday 8th of December. Call 0800 085 4878 to talk to a Dell advisor today. That's 0800 085 4878. Or visit dell.co.uk/SB Deals for details on our best offers this Cyber Monday. Limited time online offer. Hurry while stocks last. T's and C's apply.
Ah, Christmas. A time for celebrating, unwrapping and unwinding. Capture every moment with an epic iPhone 6S with a 12-megapixel camera. Now only $12.99 a month from Tesco Mobile, saving you £72. It's just one of the ways we're celebrating 100 years of great value. Go in store or search Tesco Mobile. Tesco Mobile. Every little helps.
Saving £2 per month over 36 months was £14.99. 36-month credit and rolling monthly usage agreements required. Subject to status. Terms apply. See tescomobile.com/terms.
The financial capital of the world, 24 hours a day at Bloomberg.com, on the Bloomberg Business app, and on Quick Take by Bloomberg. This is Bloomberg Radio.
This is Bloomberg Daybreak Europe.
What we're now seeing for the first time is this facade of absolute unity beginning to break down in the EU.
We expect that there will be some type of slowdown recession beyond 2019.
The European banking system, although recovering, hasn't recovered, and there are areas of fragility.
We've seen this before, trade talks that lead nowhere, and then tariffs. We just swing from one to the other, and markets get caught in the middle.
Bloomberg Daybreak Europe with Anna Edwards and Matt Miller on Bloomberg Radio.
Good morning from London. I'm Anna Edwards.
And good morning from Berlin. I'm Matt Miller. You're listening to Daybreak Europe on London DAB Digital Radio.
It is a great pleasure to have you back in that studio there in Berlin, Matt. Joining me, as always, of course, for this hour of Bloomberg Radio. Let's get straight to the markets, because we check the markets every 15 minutes here on Bloomberg Radio. And in fact, just giving investors and the audience a little update on what's going on the data picture here in Europe. We've had Euro area November services PMI coming in at 51.9. The expectation was 51.5, so that's a little bit stronger than expected, and above 50, of course, which is expansion territory for services. But let's face it, the weak spot was never services. The weak spot was always manufacturing, although still nice to see services holding up in the face of what is still a weak, even if stabilising, manufacturing picture across the European markets. Let's get to the markets then. We've got the Asia-Pacific region down 0.6% in terms of their session, reacting to some of the negativity around trade. President Trump saying yesterday it was up to him when he does a deal on trade, and not necessarily communicating much urgency to get that deal done. The European markets, though, not focused on that, and we see the Stock 600 here in Europe up by 0.5%. The FTSE 100 down 0.1%, though, because of FX moves, and we've seen the pound very strong today. 130.59, up 0.5% for the pound, partly because we've seen the Conservatives maintaining a polling lead in the most recent polls, and also because President Trump is here in the UK, and so far at least nothing has been said about the campaign, and so there hasn't been that risk playing out for the Conservative Party that we talked about last week. Oil prices a little bit stronger, up by 0.6% on WTI. There's the global growth story there. There's also what OPEC does. OPEC Plus meeting towards the end of this week. Iraq has already been saying they think there's a need to tighten up on supply. Will they have any friends in that regard? We do still see havens being bid this morning. So despite the moves higher in equity prices, we see gold moving higher. That's up 0.3%, 1,482. So still below the $1,500 an ounce mark. We also see buying of treasuries, which is interesting. So we see both equities and treasuries being lifted by a seemingly risk-on move for European investors. US futures, I should point out, though, look almost entirely flat at this hour. Matt?
All right. Now, as we mentioned, markets are increasingly risk-off over the last few sessions, this morning being the exception to that rule. The U.S. is expected to proceed on December 15th with plans to place more tariffs on China, or at least that's the plan. Will it really happen? Let's bring in Rebecca Chesworth, Senior Equity Strategist at State Street Global Advisors, joining us in the London studios. Do you think, Rebecca, that we will see, I think it's 170 billion tariffs on an extra $170 billion of goods hit China in just about 11 days?
I think, good morning, Matt. I think at the moment we're seeing about a 50% probability of that going ahead. So clearly the market and investors have got very excited for the last couple of weeks that we may see that phase one deal and tariffs delayed. But now we're seeing, after numerous events, including Trump saying it could be a year, that being pushed back again. But I think the more important thing with the market is investors have just been getting very, very confident over the last couple of weeks. And it wasn't just on trade. And I think you're seeing with the market moves today, several of the other more positive factors play out.
Yeah, what are those other positive factors then, Rebecca? We have the latest Euro area November services PMI, which I pointed out, yes, slightly above expectations, and maintaining ground above 50, which for developed markets is pretty important when you see what's been essentially a manufacturing recession globally.
Well, I think that's key. So essentially, people had talked themselves into a very negative state earlier in the year about the economy and had just been reliant on the consumer. But now you've got people thinking that businesses come back, that maybe you get some capex, that you get companies taking the most of low interest rates, building their capex and business spending out over the next year or so. You've also got various political risks which have died down somewhat. So people assuming that you reach a resolution to Brexit, for example.
What's that resolution going to look like?
You're going
to
ask
your crystal ball,
yes,
Rebecca.
Thank you. So I think the way that you're seeing investors play Brexit at the moment is to be neutral within equities, but that's been a big change because earlier in the year no one wanted to know, but you've really seen in the world where I am in ETFs, you've seen a lot of UK equity buying in the last couple of weeks, and that's taking people beyond that neutral positioning for the first time as they start to look at the value in UK equities, and particularly that yield of 4.5%, which is particularly strong against European bonds.
I can understand how investors might make the link between strong polling for the Conservative Party and a defined path forward for Brexit as far as the end of January goes. I can see that logic. But how quickly do investors then start to focus on the uncertainties around the future trading relationship and the possibility that we could still end up with a sort of rolling no-deal threat across UK equities? It seems are investors just ignoring that possibility at this point?
Yes, I think it's almost like they're ticking their boxes. We've got some of these risks are off the table. We're not looking too far in the future. But I think Brexit is just one of those things that could come back to bite people during next year. I mean, you've obviously got the US presidential election, which I think will take a significant amount of airtime during the year as well.
Yeah, you know, my concern about the presidential election is that making China the enemy plays well with the voters, and that's not good for the U.S. economy. Certainly not good for China's economy, and as a result, not good for the global economy. What are your expectations for a recession next year?
So at State Street Global Advisors, we're a little bit more bullish on equities than we have been, and one of those reasons is that recession is pushed further out. So that we don't see that exuberant state that you've seen prior to any other recession. So debt isn't too high, consumers are still stable, and that gives you a more solid backdrop Although having said that, you will find that equities are quite well priced at the moment, so living quite expensive, and therefore you've really got to look for those pockets where you've still got earnings growth or where you do have some value.
Yeah, it's interesting you say that about the reasons why we might not see a recession next year. I was looking at the New York Fed indicators, and it's sort of hovering just below the 30% level, which is of interest, of course, when you're thinking about what the US does. Let me just break into the conversation just to bring you a red headline from the Bloomberg, which says the US and China move closer to a trade deal despite heated rhetoric. So I'm just going to look for a little more detail on what that means. Weren't you just saying on TV something
China
similar?
Closer to a deal.
Yeah, despite heated rhetoric. So the US and China moving closer to agreeing on the amount of tariffs that would be rolled back in a phase one trade deal despite tensions over Hong Kong and Xinjiang. This is according to people familiar with the talks, our colleagues reporting this. They're saying that the US President Donald Trump's comments on Tuesday downplay the urgency of a deal. That shouldn't be understood to mean that the talks are stalling. And so that has sent US futures flying, Matt.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we already saw European stocks jumping this morning after kind of a rocky open. We saw some strong gains, everybody piling into risk, and now we're looking at gains of more than 1% across Europe. In fact, the DAX index right now of 1.2%, and you're seeing 0.5% gains on U.S. futures. This just goes to show you, Rebecca, doesn't it, that these markets are so volatile when it comes to trade headlines.
Certainly. I'm glad I said it was a 50-50 when you asked me, rather than trying to call it one way.
Well, this is today, though. I mean, and in an hour, we could have a story that says the U.S. and China hate each other and are never going to agree on anything, and you'll see stocks fall. Or, Donald Trump could say anything at Watford that could drive markets back down again. Our MLive question, I think, is even more relevant in that case, which is which safe haven assets are the most attractive. People can't deal with this kind of heat and just want to get out of the kitchen. Do you buy treasuries here? SocGen says they're going down to 1.2%. Do you buy the yen, which right now you can get 109 yen almost for $1. Gold is well under 1,500 right now, 1477. Which safe haven assets look the most attractive to you?
So I would break it down within the equity sphere to sectors. So you can either embrace this trade risk, and you can play it if you want to. If you've got the guts for it, you can play industrials, materials. But if you really want to look beyond it, then you go for domestic exposure. So you look at real estate companies. That's one idea. No pun intended, but as safe as houses, you have defensive assets there, you have structural growth in residential, etc. And then maybe you look at healthcare. Again, the best earnings growth in the market, no downgrades this year, and a relatively defensive space.
Okay, and it's interesting you mentioned you can play it. There's basic materials. We just saw Brent crude extending gains up by more than 1% on the back of that red headline about China. Rebecca, thank you very much. Rebecca Chesworth, Senior Equity Strategist at State Street Global Advisors, here with us in the studio. Let's get an update on what's going on in global news. And here's Bloomberg's Leanne Gerrans.
Anna, good morning. Let's start in the US. An inquiry has concluded there is overwhelming evidence the US president abused his power. Donald Trump was always denied putting pressure on Ukraine to get information on the son of his political rival, Joe Biden. The conclusions would form the basis of any formal charges against Trump if a process continues to try to remove him from office. Liz Cheney from the president's Republican Party says the opposition simply hasn't made a solid case.
Despite the fact that the Speaker of the House said that the evidence, if we're going to move forward on impeachment, needs to be clear, compelling, and bipartisan, the Democrats fail on every single one of those counts.
Japan's parliament has approved a trade pact with the US that opens the country's markets to American beef and other agricultural products. That's as Tokyo tries to thwart a threat from Donald Trump to impose new tariffs on its lucrative car exports. Bloomberg's John Hershkovich has more.
The deal was approved by Japan's upper house on Wednesday, clearing a final legislative hurdle. The U.S. has been pressing for the agreement to come into force by January 1, which could help Trump land votes in his 2020 re-election campaign in agricultural areas hit by his trade war with China that may benefit from the deal with Tokyo. In Tokyo, John Hershkovich, Bloomberg Daybreak Europe.
President Trump has revived his Rocket Man nickname for Kim Jong-un and the threat of military force against North Korea. He revisited the name he once used to mock Kim just hours after Pyongyang says it was preparing what it calls a Christmas message for America. That's if the administration fails to meet its year-end demand for concessions in nuclear talks. And Iran has admitted security forces have shot and killed protesters during recent unrest across the country, describing the victims as rioters. State media reported on widespread clashes over a rise in gas prices. Tehran is facing growing international criticism for the crackdown on demonstrators that began on November the 15th. Amnesty International says at least 200 people have died. Global news 24 hours a day, on air and on Quick Take by Bloomberg, powered by more than 2,700 journalists and analysts in more than 120 countries. I'm Leanne Gerrans. This is Bloomberg. Anna.
Thanks very much, Leanne. Now with your morning sports news, here's Lawrence Mora.
Manchester City sent a timely reminder to the Premier League leaders Liverpool last night. They thumped Burnley 4-1 at Turf Moor to move second in the table, 8 points behind Jurgen Klopp's side. Manager Pep Guardiola took a jokey swipe at those suggesting that their title defence is over. Crystal Palace moved up to 5th with a 1-0 win at home to Bournemouth in the night of a game. Tonight, Liverpool will look to heap further pressure on Everton boss Marco Silva in the Merseyside derby at Anfield. Former Manchester United manager Jose Mourinho returns to Old Trafford with his new club Tottenham. Self-titled Special One says his Old Trafford experience was memorable. Now in Scotland, Celtic and Rangers resume their Premiership title battle this evening. The leaders are looking to make it 11 wins in a row when they host Hamilton. Second place Rangers visit the side below them in the table, Aberdeen, and it might be 9 points ahead of their opponents, but manager Stephen Gerrard still thinks that Aberdeen can challenge for a top 2 finish.
All right, there's your sports report. When we come back, we're going to give you a Bloomberg opinion piece about sterling. This is Bloomberg.
Have you wanted to speak a new language, but you thought it'd be too hard or take too much time? Then go to Babbel.com, download the app, and try it for free. In just 15 minutes a day, you'll be on your way to speaking a new language in just a few weeks. And right now, you can try Babbel for free. Babbel starts out teaching you words and phrases by matching them with pictures. You won't believe how easy the interactive program is. Soon the sentences get a little bigger, and before you know it, you're having simulated conversations voiced by native speakers. And because Babbel is crafted by language experts and uses the spaced repetition method, in just 10 to 15 minutes a day, you'll be speaking the language of your choice with real confidence. With Babbel, you can speak a language. Just go to Babbel.com and start your first lesson in the language of your choice for free. Download the Babbel app or go to Babbel.com and try it for free. That's Babbel.com.
Family properties and investments have been passed to the next generation, but while the business has evolved, has your accountant stayed behind? Burden Accountants and Advisors examines the latest business trends, market conditions, and industry issues to maximize your tax advantages and meet your financial goals. Let Burden use their insight to create innovative tax solutions for your family and your business. Visit BurdenLLP.com to get started. BERDONLLP.com. Burden Accountants and Advisors. We listen, we solve, we do.
3, 2, 1. Oh no. Which button am I?
When every second counts, you can't wing it.
Guys, a little help up here?
In a home fire, you may have less than 2 minutes to get out. So make a family home fire escape plan. Then practice home fire drills at least twice a year so everyone knows what to do when they hear. Prepare your family at ready.gov/fire drill. Brought to you by FEMA, the Ad Council, and Make Safe Happen.
Influential conversations from Bloomberg Television. Here's Sherry Ann.
The Trump administration has been looking at Chinese tech as a national security threat for some time now, and it's focused on companies like Huawei, ZTE, and TikTok. To that end, a new U.S. agency has a $60 billion budget to help developing countries and businesses find alternatives to companies like Huawei and ZTE. Joining us now from Washington is Robert Strayer, the State Department Deputy Assistant Secretary for Cyber and International Communications and Information Policy. Ambassador, Thank you so much for your time today. Now, this latest approach seems to be the carrot approach, where you're trying to convince these developing nations to stay away from cheaper Chinese tech. Is this an acknowledgement that perhaps the stick is not working?
Well, for some time, we've sought to work with developing countries to ensure that they can have reliable and secure communications technology. So this isn't a different approach to the matter. Independently, we're also working with partners and allies to educate them about the risks of 5G, that there can be the potential for vendors of 5G to be under control of another government that would require them to take actions that are not in their citizens' interests. And that's particularly the case in countries like China, where there's no independent judiciary or rule of law for a company to object, to be made to take actions in line with their intelligence and security services.
Hear more interviews like this one on Bloomberg Television, streaming live on Bloomberg.com and on the Bloomberg mobile app, or check your local cable listings.
Markets, headlines and breaking news 24 hours a day at Bloomberg.com, the Bloomberg Business app and on QuickTake by Bloomberg. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
With this Bloomberg Radio Business Flash, so the helicopter of the US president has landed for the NATO meeting that is taking place just outside of London. We'll go to him if he says anything in a moment. But already the president has caused waves, of course, in the global markets. Yesterday he said he was relaxed about whether he got a US-China trade deal after the election or not. Now, today, according to people familiar with the trade talks, US negotiators are expecting a phase 1 deal with China to be completed before the American tariffs are set on the 15th of December. So it's a real tug of war over the trade headline. So in the markets, the US stock 600 jump on that news. We're up by more than 1 percentage point after that sort of better news on the actual negotiations between these two powerhouses. This after the MSCI Asia Pacific dropped 0.6% overnight. And yesterday we saw US benchmark Treasury yields dip below 1.7% briefly and US stocks tumble. But now a reversal of that negativity on this massive trade tariff story seems to be the narrative, at least at the moment. But as I say, it's changing by the minute. In terms of looking at the US futures right now, they have also popped higher, up 0.4% on the S&P 500 futures, and Dow Jones futures also up almost 0.5% right now. In terms of yields, I'll give you a check on benchmark yields in the US, 1.73%, so up by 2 basis points. German yields negative 34 basis points. The other big thing that has been moving is oil. We have the OPEC meeting, but also oil moving on the trade headlines. As I say, WTI crude oil higher by 1.2% now, trading at $56.77. Brent crude at 61, spot 65, so also up by 1.3%. You're listening to Bloomberg Daybreak Europe. That was a Bloomberg Business Flash. Now here's Leanne Gerrans with more on what's going on around the world. Good morning.
Good morning, Caroline. Let's start in the UK. Inquests are opening today into the deaths of the London Bridge terror attack victims. Jack Merritt and Saskia Jones, who were both in their 20s, were fatally stabbed on Friday. Convicted terrorist Usman Khan also injured 3 other people before being shot dead by armed police. Rents in prime shopping districts in Hong Kong will fall sharply next year, according to property agency Knight Frank. It's predicting reductions of at least 15% for street shop spaces in key areas as retail sales plunge amid ongoing protests. Street-level outlets in Causeway Bay charge the highest rents in the world in the third quarter, even beating London's Bond Street. And Peloton's stock is taking a hit after an online backlash over its holiday ad. It depicts a woman showing a video diary of her time on the Peloton bike, but critics have described it as a sexist, saying it seemed like the woman was being pressured to keep her weight in check. There's been no comment from Peloton. Global news 24 hours a day on air and on Quick Take by Bloomberg, powered by more than 2,700 journalists and analysts in more than 120 countries. I'm Leanne Gerrans. This is Bloomberg.
Bloomberg Opinion, informed perspectives, and expert data-driven commentary on breaking news.
It is 9:20 in the city. Time to check in with Bloomberg Opinion. We're joined by opinion columnist Marcus Ashworth, who's writing about sterling. You might have heard him in the intervening periods, perhaps. Sterling then breaking above 130. Marcus, what is driving that for you? Is it sustainable?
I think it is sustainable. I think it's largely to do with the fact that we are essentially just a week away from the election and the polls haven't really moved. We had a wobble week last week. Now we've got a situation which, if anything, the Tory vote is firming up again, and the Labour vote is at best unchanged. So it looks almost certain that there will be a Conservative majority. And I think traders understandably are trying to sort of move ahead of that and trying to price that in a bit further. Some of the polls have been, a bit wobbly up to recently, but they've started to go back up to where they sort of from whence they came. I'm not saying it's all over yet, but barring any fireworks from Mr. Trump, and I think that was what people were expecting, or certainly the Labour Party had been banking on, trying to get something to stick on their NHS claims, which are brutal, utterly fanciful, and Trump's rubbished them, and in that sense he's now learnt or been told perhaps not to get involved, and that again is taking away the last sort of real straw that perhaps the Labour Party had to try and make a big impact on this election.
What's fair value look like to you? I mean, how much should the pound be worth without this political?
Well, 2 to the dollar, obviously, but no, I think seriously.
You've got a holiday coming up.
Yeah, exactly. 135, I think, is first stop. I don't think it's going to go massively higher than that straight away on the confirmation of a Tory win. Because of the next year of battling through to a trade agreement, and much more importantly, growth is going to continue to be very weak in the UK and globally. I think that still makes it more likely the Bank of England cuts rates before it eventually does have to hike rates, if and when a large fiscal spend comes through. But that won't be for at least a year or year and a half, 2 years before they are, demonstrably seeing growth pick up on wage inflation, etc. So, for that sense, I think sterling is undervalued, and it's got a bit more to go to the upside. It may eventually get above 140, 145, but I don't think that's going to be a straight line. If there were to be hung parliament, I think it's straight down to 120, and possibly if Jeremy Corbyn does get into number 10, it goes down to parity.
Interesting. We see President Trump is on the ground in the UK, as we know, Marcus, and he's being asked. I think we're going to bring you any live comments that he makes, but it seems as if he is being asked about his relationship with Boris Johnson. He said he enjoyed a chat with the UK's Johnson on NATO and on trade. So maybe carefully not mentioning the UK election. We'll see what transpires there. How quickly do you think, after we get through the 12th of December, if things play out as you described initially, Marcus, how quickly do people start to focus on the end of December and the potential for no-deal Brexit or for things to go awry in that regard?
Well, I think, first things first, Brexit has to happen before January 31st. Then I think it's the dynamic shifts. UK is out of the EU. The EU, therefore, is going to treat things differently. It now has someone it has to deal with in every sense of the word. It wanted to deal with May, but it didn't quite work off. This time around with Boris Johnson, they're going to have to deal with what's in front of them, and that's going to change the whole mindset around doing any form of trade deal. And as has been alluded by Michel Barnier, it is possible. It's going to be difficult, and it may well get extended. But the point is that the way that they handle the UK government, it's been all over the place the last 3 years, will change on both sides, and that's going to make for some interesting times. But I mean, there are bigger global factors moving, on trade that can overweigh these things as well.
Yes, first of all, thank you very much. Pleasure having you in the studio with us. Marcus Ashworth from the Opinion Team. Type OPIN GO to get his work and the work of his colleagues. Speaking of trade, the NATO summit, which may not sound like a trade event, is going to have a lot to do with that. We'll talk about it next. This is Bloomberg.
With a Bloomberg Business of Sports report, I'm Michael Barr. Pennsylvania Governor Tom Wolf wants Major League Baseball to rethink a restructuring plan that would affect 3 minor league teams in his state. The professional baseball agreement between Major League Baseball and the National Association of Professional Baseball Leagues expires after the 2020 season. The restructuring proposal would lead to 42 minor league teams being dropped from circuits. Major league teams say they spend nearly $500 million annually in salary to support the minor leagues, but get back only $18 million. Wolf says the current proposal will put players and employees out of jobs and be economically harmful to host communities. Former women athletes are donating millions of dollars to help build facilities and scholarships. It comes as the 50th anniversary of Title IX approaches. The federal gender equality law came into play in 1972. And that is a Bloomberg Business of Sports report. I'm Michael Barr.
Are you interested in a challenging and exciting career? One where you can be part of solving complex challenges across industries and geographies? Bloomberg's ever-expanding technology, data, news, and media services foster innovation, empower clients, and offer nearly limitless opportunities for career growth. Visit Bloomberg.com/careers today to view our current job opportunities. Bloomberg LP is an equal opportunity employer. The address once again is Bloomberg.com/careers.
No company wants to be involved in an international dispute. But when disagreements arise, you need expertise at your side. Take a closer look at ICDR, the International Center for Dispute Resolution. Backed by the longevity and strength of the American Arbitration Association, the ICDR is the world's leading provider of cross-border dispute resolution services, handling more cases than any other institution. Find out why global expertise matters. Visit ICDR.org.
Why has J.D. Power ranked Commonwealth Financial Network #1 in independent advisor satisfaction among financial investment firms for the 6th straight time? We think it comes down to one thing: you. Because it's your input and feedback that keeps us focused on what's most important to you and your clients, and continually pushes us to be the best we can be. Maybe that's why we receive top marks in every category of the J.D. Power 2019 Advisor Satisfaction Survey. They named us #1 in client support, #1 in firm leadership, #1 in operational support, #1 in compensation, #1 in professional development support, and #1 in technology support. Ready to partner with the best? Call Commonwealth at 866-462-3638 or visit commonwealth.com and feel the power. Member FINRA, a registered investment advisor. For 2019 J.D. Power award information, visit jdpower.com/awards.
The lifeblood of tech startups isn't just money. It's executive and technical skills. The kind of skills that companies need to build real products. And the skills that venture capitalist Chris Sugden of Edison Partners sees in the graduates that are coming out of New Jersey Institute of Technology.
The amazing thing about NJIT is their graduates, they have multiple offers on average, not just one. They're coming out with real skill sets that are immediately hireable and available to them. I think we see an understanding by the faculty and administration at NJIT that we've got to train and educate the whole student, not just their, one side of their brain. And I do think that's sort of part of the DNA today. There's practical and there's sort of academia, and merging those two together and understanding that if we're going to have our young people go get great jobs and have great successful careers, they've got to have both sides of their brain activated. And I think we see that with NJIT.
NJIT, New Jersey Institute of Technology. Learn more at njit.edu.
Full breakfast, cup of coffee, whatever you have in the morning, have it at daybreak.
What's the outlook for the pound if there is another election?
Nathan Hager.
The U.S. could still delay those tariffs?
And Karen Moscow.
It is the 5th major industry player to make some sort of zero commission offer.
Bloomberg Daybreak.
Bloomberg has more from Hong Kong.
Weekdays at 5 a.m. Eastern on Bloomberg Radio, the Bloomberg Business app, and BloombergRadio.com. Bloomberg, the world is listening. Business is like a puzzle.
Can you make a call given this swirl of data?
Get all the pieces.
They're getting mixed signals from governments.
He's failed to gain traction.
Bloomberg Radio, the Bloomberg Business, Radio.com, and iHeartRadio apps, and BloombergRadio.com.
Broadcasting live to London on DAB Digital Radio, to New York, Bloomberg 1130, to Washington DC, Bloomberg 99.1, to Boston, Bloomberg 106.1, to San Francisco, Bloomberg 960, and around the globe, the Bloomberg Business app and BloombergRadio.com. This is Bloomberg Daybreak Europe.
Good morning. It's 9:30 in London, 10:30 here in Berlin.
That's Matt Miller you're listening to there.
Oh,
He's
sorry,
in Berlin.
I'm Matt Miller.
I'm Anna Edwards here. I'm in London. You're listening to Bloomberg.
They know.
Daybreak Europe. They do know. And just, it is 9:30 here in London, as you say, Matt. It's also 9:30 in Watford, just north of London, where we are waiting for President Trump. Well, he's arriving at the NATO meeting pretty much as we speak. If he starts to say anything, of course, we'll bring you those thoughts. But in the meantime, we've seen markets bounce, Matt, on our reporting at Bloomberg that suggests that progress is still being made on the trade deal between the US and China, despite the negative rhetoric we got yesterday at the NATO summit.
Yeah, absolutely. We were already looking at gains of 0.5%, around 0.5% on the continental indexes, the DAX, the CAC, and the FTSE MIB at least. Now we're looking at 1% and change, 1.25% in Frankfurt, up 1.25% in Paris as well. The FTSE, which was down this morning at the start of the session and kind of bouncing around under little changed before this story broke, is now up as well, about 0.4%. So we're making up a lot of the ground that we lost on, that we've been losing since Wednesday, basically. Markets hit, some equity indexes hit all-time highs again on Wednesday. The S&P 500 among them, and have been in decline since. But now we're making up a lot of that ground really across equity indexes. In terms of U.S. futures, you see big gains, well, decent gains there as well. About 0.5% on the mini contracts for the S&P 500, for the Dow Jones Industrial Average, and for the NASDAQ. So watch out for a risk-on day when U.S. markets open. Oil also had been doing pretty well despite concerns about trade, and now that those concerns have lessened, it's off to the races for Brent crude right now, up 1.25%, a little bit more, about 82 cents to $61.64 a barrel. NYMEX WTI also looking at some strong gains this morning, up 69 cents to $56.79 a barrel. Just quickly touching on currencies, we had the pound shoot up above $1.30. It's holding well above that level, 130.42. The dollar itself, though, is gaining against the euro, which goes for $1.1068, and the dollar is gaining against the yen. You can now buy 108.77 yen for your U.S. dollar, with a treasury yield bouncing back up to 1.7431%. Anna?
Now, Matt, NATO leaders have begun arriving for their meeting in Watford, just outside of London this morning. So far, Boris Johnson has said he had a very good meeting with President Trump, while NATO's Secretary General Jens Stoltenberg has said there's nothing new in differences within the NATO alliance. We saw some real differences on display yesterday. For more, we're joined by Bloomberg's Maria Tadeo, who's at that NATO meeting in Watford. And we just heard from Emmanuel Macron, Maria, who said that NATO should not only be talking about money. It was the fallout between Macron and Trump and the visible tension on display at the NATO meeting yesterday between the two that's sort of taken the headlines so far.
It does. Justin Trudeau deciding. Well, he's saying it's not just about money, and that is Emmanuel Macron. Of course, the problem is that it's becoming very difficult to detangle the politics from the trade, because for Donald Trump, it really is in many ways about money. He is saying that NATO works, whereas before it didn't, because more countries are paying more into NATO. He also says that it is serving a purpose because you're seeing more countries take a more active role. So you can see why the two men are coming from two very different places. And yesterday, of course, that was very obvious when Trump said that Macron had been insulting, disrespectful, that he had been very nasty to NATO when he said it was brain dead. I do have to say, however, Trump at one point called NATO obsolete, so the French are wondering what exactly is the difference.
What is the, John Maynard Keynes, I believe, said when the facts change, I change my mind. Since Trump started attacking NATO at the beginning of his presidency, things have changed, right? I mean, the alliance has strengthened.
And Matt, to be very frank, yes, and I was at NATO yesterday. They were having an event, and many of the people I spoke to there would admit or would concede that the pressure from Trump, who openly said you have to pay up or we're not going to pay for rich countries, did force everyone to think, actually, he has a point and we should make an effort. And you're seeing gradually, there's not many countries that hit the 2% target, but you are seeing more countries pay more and make an effort towards that. So that is something that NATO would give credit to Trump for, although they say his ways are not the most diplomatic. And when I spoke to Jens Stoltenberg and I told him, look, Trump is saying and taking all the credit for the increase in spending, why are you not taking credit for it? He just said, I don't care how we get there. What I care is that we had a strong NATO, and Trump has made it stronger.
Interesting that we've seen, this 2% club is a big deal, isn't it, for Boris Johnson? For President Trump. And Boris Johnson saying this morning, we are investing 2% of GDP in defence. And I think there's a special event you can go to at NATO if you are part of that 2% club and you stump up that much. Let me just briefly ask you, Maria, about what is being talked about behind the scenes as we watch pictures of all the arrivals and the handshakes. I know there's been some video circulating around Justin Trudeau and the sort of behind-the-scenes chit-chat that has been happening between world leaders.
And Anna, just to go back on the 2%, yesterday Trump said he would like some countries to pay 4%. And this is something that is very confusing to people because they have no idea where he gets that number from. In terms of today, well, there is a video circulating where you see Justin Trudeau, Macron, Mark Rutte, and Boris Johnson himself, and they appear to criticize a leader. They don't name that person, but they do say, well, we were late because he took a 40-minute press conference. He always does this, and so on. Trump has not really talked about this today, and the focus on the ground is whether we're going to get a resolution on Turkey, whether we get a communique by the end of this, and of course China. The U.S. would love for NATO to toughen their language on China. That feeds very much or would feed very much into their narrative that over a long period of time China is the biggest threat to Western countries.
Maria, thanks very much. Maria Tadeo talking to us from Watford, England. If you've had the distinct displeasure of flying out of Luton Airport, you passed Watford on the way from London. I thought the video that she was talking about, Anna, I mean, it seems like they're joking more than criticizing.
Well, I don't know. Trump. They don't name check anybody, do they? But
no, they're kind of laughing. But also, they seem like they may be a little jealous. Who would want to listen to Macron for a 40-minute presser? Probably not many.
Well, the press conference with Trump yesterday was very entertaining between Macron and Trump. So maybe the double act works well. Let's get the latest in global news. Here's Bloomberg's Leanne Gerrans.
Good morning, Anna. Let's start in the US, where President Trump has been accused of abusing his power, intimidating witnesses, and obstructing an inquiry. A committee's released a report after looking into claims he pressured Ukraine to investigate a political rival. Donald Trump rejects that and calls the investigation a witch hunt. The committee chair, Adam Schiff, says he acted improperly.
He was willing to sacrifice the national security of the United States by withholding military aid and diplomatic recognition in the form of that White House meeting in order to get what he wanted.
Another committee will now start to consider formal charges later today. Elsewhere, US President Donald Trump revived his nickname for the North Korean leader, calling him a rocket man at a NATO summit here in London. Bloomberg's Ji Hae Lee has more.
It's safe to say things have made a full circle after Donald Trump and Kim Jong-un went back to old habits, even after their meeting in Singapore and Hanoi. Kim has been resuming his short-range ballistic missile launches, and Trump now going back to applying pressure on Kim, even hinting at using military force against North Korea if they, quote, have to. In Seoul, Ji Hae Lee, Bloomberg Daybreak Europe.
The Philippines has reopened its main airport as Typhoon Kumari heads to the South China Sea. Bloomberg's Andrea Colonzo reports.
Heavy rains and strong winds brought by Typhoon Kumari has left at least 3 people dead in the Philippines, with 500,000 others displaced and key structures like a local airport heavily damaged. The typhoon is on its way out of the Philippine waters and is headed towards the South China Sea. In Manila, Andrea Colonzo, Bloomberg Daybreak Euro.
And Iran has admitted security forces have shot and killed protesters during recent unrest across the country, describing the victims as rioters. State media reported on widespread clashes over a rise in gas prices. Tehran is facing growing international criticism for the crackdown on demonstrations that began on November the 15th. Amnesty International says at least 200 people have now died. Global news 24 hours a day, on air and on Quick Take by Bloomberg, powered by more than 2,700 journalists and analysts in more than 120 countries. I'm Leanne Gerrans. This is Bloomberg. Anna.
Thanks very much, Leanne. So, quick market check for you. Matt, European equity markets up by 1%. Our reporting here at Bloomberg suggesting that despite all the negative rhetoric coming from President Trump at the NATO summit yesterday and the threats of retaliation over various bills passed in the US House, it does seem as if progress is being made towards a phase 1 trade deal, and that has lifted stocks, it's lifted US futures, lifted commodity prices too.
It looks like markets are also increasingly confident that you're going to get a Brexit deal as the pound rises to its highest level since May. We'll talk to Jane Foley next, head of FX strategy at Rabobank. This
is Bloomberg.
I'm a 40-year-old man that walked in there to get his high school diploma. It was very hard for me, but Miss Araceli, she gave me direction.
At age 47, Marco finished his high school diploma.
50% of getting your high school diploma is walking through those doors. The other 50% is doing the work.
No one gets a diploma alone. If you're thinking of finishing your high school diploma, you have help. Find free adult education classes near you at finishyourdiploma.org. That's finishyourdiploma.org. Brought to you by the Dollar General Literacy Foundation and the Ad Council.
Something remarkable happens when just the right elements come together. Ideas with technology, data with inspiration, investors with solutions. This is what Invesco does every day, because they believe the possibilities of life and investing are greater when we come together. Invesco. Let's invest in greater possibilities together. To learn more, visit Invesco.com/together. Invesco Distributors, Incorporated.
Rich is just a really good guy. The term good egg isn't enough to describe him. He's also certified organic and free range. Rich puts the cap back on everything. The toothpaste, the olive oil, the shampoo, everything. He lets his 10-year-old nephew beat him at virtual tennis, even though he can straight up slay his 10-year-old nephew in virtual tennis. When the toilet paper is running low, Rich replaces the roll on the actual holder, not just on the back of the toilet. Rich is texting and driving. Rich, no. What are you doing, Rich? I was just telling everyone how great you are. Texting and driving makes good people look bad. Visit StopTextStopWrecks.org. A public service announcement brought to you by the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration and the Ad Council.
Where would we be without you? The butchers, the bakers, the digital future makers. From BLTs to MOTs, you're the companies that keep us all going. So mind your business, London. And so will we, with our Insights Hub to help you navigate the year ahead. Because deal or no deal, from Downing Street to the High Street, every business is part of something far, far bigger. Find out how HSBC could help you at business.hsbc.uk/mindyourbusiness.
On 3, our unlimited data is actually unlimited, like 4 reels. That means you can scroll and scroll and scroll through all the Black Friday deals.
Because we have no speed limits, no data caps, and you'll be 5G ready at no extra cost.
Wow, so many savings.
Our Black Friday deals are now on. Save up to £480. Switch to 3, in-store or online. See 3.co.uk/unlimited-data. Savings on selected phones on 24-month contracts. Ends 5th of December. Terms apply.
Great music gets people moving. So here's the perfect gift for someone who's always on the go. The highly portable, special edition Bose SoundLink Mini Bluetooth speaker. Now only $149 in the Black Tag gift event at Curry's PC World. Big sound, deep bass, and 6 months free Spotify for great music right through from the Christmas party to the beach party season. Make anyone's Christmas at Curry's PC World. T's and C's apply.
At TradePoint, we know that big jobs can mean a big shop around. We've a wide range of products from kitchens to plumbing to electrical or timber, so you can get it all in one place, 7 days a week, making big jobs smaller. So, for all you need, when you need it, get to TradePoint or go to tradepoint.co.uk.
Get what you wanted this Black Friday. Sleek new laptop. Or one of those know-it-all smart speakers. So now is the time for Sky Superfast Broadband. It's totally unlimited, powerful enough for all your gadgets. And it's just £27 a month for 18 months with £19.95 setup fee. Another great deal. Pause your new 4K games console and search sky.com. Sky Fibre areas, speeds vary by location, no traffic management policy. See sky.com. Prices may change during this period, terms apply.
As the impeachment inquiry moves on to the next level, the House Judiciary Committee is holding its first hearings to decide whether to draft 4 more articles of impeachment.
Inquiry into Donald J. Trump, the 45th President of the United States. Trump did not give an expletive about Ukraine.
Listen today to hear an expert panel discuss the grounds for presidential impeachment and whether President Trump's actions in the Ukraine scandal are in fact impeachable. Search Impeachment News on TuneIn to listen.
Want to hear about the latest and greatest things to listen to on TuneIn? For reminders of the biggest live sports games, debates, and breaking news stories, follow @TuneIn on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram to stay connected with the audio that matters to you.
It's College Football Conference Championship Weekend, and TuneIn is your home to hear all the champions crowned. This Saturday at 4 p.m. Eastern Time, it's the SEC Championship. The undefeated LSU Tigers, led by the Heisman frontrunner quarterback Joe Burrow, look to cap their perfect regular season. However, it won't be easy as their opponent, the Georgia Bulldogs, will be hungry to pull off the upset and earn their ticket to the College Football Playoff. Catch all the action on TuneIn. Search College Football to find your game.
From ESPN and the award-winning producers of The Sterling Affairs comes the latest season of 30 for 30 podcasts. 4 brand new stories of espionage.
He wanted this team to be the Barcelona of women's basketball.
Resilience.
I started to scream. I tried to get away.
Corruption.
It's the culture of win at all costs.
And rebirth.
How will we ever rebuild it?
30 for 30 podcasts, season 6. Listen in favorite 30 for 30 podcasts on TuneIn.
News 24 hours a day at Bloomberg.com, the Bloomberg Business app, and on QuickTake by Bloomberg. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
This Bloomberg Radio Business Flash. So stocks gained this morning on fresh trade lines. Bloomberg reporting that people familiar with the trade negotiations are saying that trade talks between the US and China are expected to deliver a phase 1 deal and possibly completed before the American tariffs are set to rise on the 15th of December. That is quite different to what the president was saying, which these people say were off-the-cuff remarks on day 1 of the NATO summit here in London, when he said that he would be happy to wait until after the 2020 election to do that trade deal. So as I say, stocks gaining on that. We're up by almost 1% on the US Stoxx 600. Also, US futures on all 3 main index futures are up right now. Treasuries decline. This after we had already a negative tone in Asia. The MSCI Asia Pacific dropping 0.6%. We also saw US stocks tumble yesterday because of that trade anxiety, and Treasury yields dipped below 1.7% yesterday, also on that news. Having said that, today we trade at 1.74, so we're up by 0.2% on benchmark US yields on the 10-year, negative 34 basis points for German Bund yields. The other things that moving around, obviously also related to the trade story, the Bloomberg Dollar Spot Index flat, gold actually down 0.1% now, so reversing the gains that we saw earlier, 1,476. WTI and Brent crude are also both up by 1.2% this morning. The other thing to note is the pound, stronger 0.3%. This as the polling shows again that perhaps the Conservatives have a stronger lead over Labour in the UK election race. This as Prime Minister Boris Johnson is just greeting all of the NATO leaders in Watford, just outside of London, for the NATO meeting this morning. That is a Bloomberg Business Flash. Now here's Leanne Guerin with more on what's going on around the world. Good morning.
Good morning, Caroline. The Conservatives are promising to ramp up anti-terrorism protection if they win next week's election. Following the attack at London Bridge, the Prime Minister wants public venues to prepare in the same way they would for a fire. Labour's Shadow Chancellor John McDonnell will give a speech on the economy later today. Kamala Harris has said she simply didn't have the resources to keep running for president in the US. The senator from California suspended her campaign for the Democratic nomination. She had a strong start that sent her to second place in the polls, but her campaign actually failed to catch on. And finally, sloshed on the slopes. More than 1,000 Brits are injured every day during the ski season. That's because of drinking on the slopes, according to one of Britain's biggest insurers. Claims data from Direct Line suggests that nearly 400,000 skiers have suffered sprains and almost 300,000 cuts or bruises in crashes while under the influence of booze, and that's over the last 5 years. Global news 24 hours a day, on air and on QuickTake by Bloomberg, powered by more than 2,700 journalists and analysts in more than 120 countries. I'm Leanne Guerin. This is Bloomberg. Anna.
I was just going to hand it to Matt and say, cautionary tale, because I know you like a bit of skiing this time of year. Matt, stay off the sauce.
I have to say, I have suffered all of those injuries. And then
any
some,
of them due to a little glue
completely
vine?
Completely sober.
Oh. Is that better or worse?
Sometimes if you have your alcohol jacket on, you're safer, aren't you? But not in this case, apparently.
God looks after children and drunks is something I've heard. In any case,
yes,
with
I've heard that before.
Let's get over to John Tucker. He's standing by bright and early in the Daybreak Studios at 731 Lexington Avenue. John, what do you got ahead for us?
You know, it's supposed to be après ski. You do that afterwards. That's the whole
good point.
Anyway, it's, we've already had to tear up the show once this morning, a little bit like being on a teeter-totter. President Trump yesterday downplaying urgency of getting a deal with China. And, of course, this morning our sources say the U.S. and China are moving closer to agreeing on the amount of tariffs that be rolled back in the Phase 1 deal. Now, after yesterday's 1% sell-off for the Dow, what next? We're going to speak to Lori Calvasina, head of U.S. equity strategy at RBC Capital Markets. OPEC cuts and a possible trade deal that has crude oil higher this morning. Bloomberg's Alex Longley will take us to the oil patch. And with Donald Trump in the UK back here, the impeachment inquiry moves into the next phase today. I was watching live, well, it's still going on right now. I guess President Trump with a photo op with Boris Johnson and the head of NATO.
Yes, earlier. He kept them waiting for a long time, and there he is. He finally emerges onto the stage.
And he's not smiling, is he? Also, it was kind of interesting seeing President Erdogan of Turkey getting up there. Also one of those just not smiling as he had his photo taken. So I don't know if that means anything.
We'll keep following the smiles.
Yeah, keep smiling. Join myself and Nathan Hager, who is smiling this morning. Bloomberg Daybreak Americas in a matter of moments.
All right, looking forward to that. Bloomberg Daybreak is up next out in New York. If you're listening on Sirius XM channel 119 or really anywhere outside of London, if you're listening in the city on London DAB digital radio, you will hear Bloomberg Surveillance. Anna?
Matt, let's talk about where we are in these markets. A great voice to have with us this morning. Jane Foley, head of FX strategy at Rabobank. We need to talk to you about what's going on with the pound, Jane, and also the global trade narrative. Let's start with the pound, shall we? Because we have seen a big move higher in cable, 130.46, so over that 130 mark. What's still left to do if we do see a conservative win on December the 12th? Because a lot of that seems to be increasingly baked in.
August, for instance, we see short positions were really quite reduced. The last couple of weeks, maybe if you look at the CFTC data, a little bit more wobbly because, of course, those short positions have been reduced by so much. But certainly the correlation between sterling's fate and that really of Boris Johnson, and particularly the expectation that he can pass through his withdrawal agreement through Parliament does seem to be very, very closely aligned with sterling. So a lot of it's baked in. I think there's probably a little bit further to go. And I think if Johnson wins that election with a working majority, then we're looking at 132. Beyond that, potentially 134. But of course, it might all change next year when those trade talks start. Because if those trade talks don't go too well at the beginning, the market might begin again to anticipate that. Would there still be a hard Brexit or a no-deal Brexit at the end of the transition phase, which of course is only 1 year away?
All right, so we could. The pound is fascinating because of the spike this morning, but of course, nobody knows, right, Jane, what's going to happen as far as the vote on December 12th. One thing our colleagues told us this morning about another currency, the dollar, is that it's no longer a safe haven, and I wonder what you think about that. Mark Hudmore from the MLive blog says the market no longer sees the dollar as a safe haven play, instead preferring to use gold or the yen or treasuries, but not the greenback. What do you think?
Well, I would say that if we were looking at what defines a safe haven, yes, it's going to be the yen. The gold is very interesting because I think if we look back to when gold stopped becoming a safe haven, I think we'd have to go back to the 90s, the early 90s, and we would look perhaps at the first Gulf War, and gold didn't behave as the market then expected. And right back then, people were saying, well, look, why would you buy gold as a safe haven when you can use treasuries and get a positive yield? Gold, after all, equates to a negative yield because you had to pay insurance and storage costs. But now that you've come to a world where there's so much negative yielding debt, then maybe you look at gold again. So I think gold again is beginning to shine up, shall we say, as a safe haven once more for those reasons. But the dollar, well, we've been dollar bulls really since the start of 2018, and it's a call that really has stood us in good stead. And I would say that whilst you can't say that the dollar is a traditional safe haven because the US has got a budget deficit, it's got a current account deficit, for instance, I think it does work as a safe haven for many, many investors, and this is because of the dollar's dominance in the global payment system. So, for instance, you look at emerging markets, think about a currency like India, think about India 20 years ago to today, think about the extra commodities, dollar-denominated commodities, oil, for instance, that it needs. Think about the savings glut. Where is that savings going to go? A lot of it, I think, has been pushing into US equities. That's why US equities have performed or outperformed market expectations this year. So I don't think you can take all of those factors away from the dollar, and I think the dollar can continue to perform well for those reasons.
And Jane, just get your thoughts on how risk on or risk off you're feeling then with the sort of ebb and flow of the trade story as we track it this week. The latest lines coming out of our colleagues reporting on the US-China trade negotiations, saying the US and China are moving closer to a trade deal despite the comments from President Trump. The people who are familiar with the conversations are saying that Trump's comments are not indicative of the talks falling apart. So with that in mind, how risk on do you position yourself into year end?
I think the yen probably gives us a good reflection of what the market as a whole is positioning itself. And if we look at the yen over the last weeks, a couple of months maybe, then the yen is relatively soft. But it has pulled back a bit over the last couple of days because of Trump's comments. And I would say that the longer we go without knowing a date or even a venue as to where this trade deal is going to be signed, the market will become more sceptical. And even if we do get a deal, and even if we do get a spike in risk appetite on the back of a deal, the market at some point is going to look towards phase two. And really the reason that there is a phase two was because there was so much that they knew could not be compromised upon for phase one. So we do think that in the course of 2020, there will be at some point another resurgence of tensions between the US and China, and another bout of safe haven demand on the back of that.
All right, definitely a story. That's the gift that keeps on giving. It's not the Peloton, it's the U.S.-China trade war. That's what I'm getting you, Anna, for Christmas this year. Jane, pleasure having you with us. Jane Foley there, head of FX strategy at Rabobank on a day when really currencies are so fascinating to watch. Just a reminder, we saw the pound spike earlier, right now at 130.49. But the dollar is stronger against the euro, which is hovering still at 110.71.
Yeah, absolutely. Dollar overall fairly flat. We did see some appetite for yen earlier on. That was wound back a little bit as we got those more risk-on headlines coming through on those trade tensions. No doubt trade will continue to be a theme through the US session. US futures pointing higher by between 4 and 0.6% as President Trump is on the ground here in the UK once again for this NATO summit. This is Bloomberg.
Christmas, a time for celebrating, unwrapping and unwinding. Capture every moment with an epic iPhone 6s with a 12-megapixel camera. Now only $12.99 a month from Tesco Mobile, saving you £72. It's just one of the ways we're celebrating 100 years of great value. Go in store or search Tesco Mobile. Tesco Mobile. Every little helps.
Saving £2 per month over 36 months was £14.99. 36-month credit and rolling monthly usage agreements required. Subject to status. Terms apply. See tescomobile.com/terms. This week at Tesco, buy 2 items from our chilled party food range, like tempura prawns or mozzarella sticks, and get a third one free. So for every 2 people you invite, you can ask another for free. But who? Linda from Accounts or Julio from Magaluf 2010? Tesco, delivering Christmas for 100 years. Cheapest item free selected stores while stocks last. Ends 1st of January.
As the impeachment inquiry moves on to the next level, the House Judiciary Committee is holding its first hearings to decide whether to draft 4 more articles of impeachment.
Impeachment inquiry into Donald J. Trump, the 45th President of the United States. Trump did not give an expletive about Ukraine.
Listen today to hear an expert panel discuss the grounds for presidential impeachment and whether President Trump's actions in the Ukraine scandal are in fact impeachable. Search Impeachment News on TuneIn to listen.
Capital of the world, 24 hours a day at Bloomberg.com, on the Bloomberg Business app, and on Quick Take by Bloomberg. This is Bloomberg Radio.
Live from the Bloomberg Interactive Brokers studios, this is Bloomberg Daybreak for Wednesday, December 4th, 2019. Coming up this hour.
S&P futures rise as the U.S. and China move closer to a trade deal.
Oil gains as OPEC members prepare to meet in Vienna.
The pound strengthens after a new poll points to a conservative win at next week's election.
And it's the end of an era at Google as the company's founders step down.
The House Judiciary Committee takes over the impeachment inquiry today, plus day 2 of NATO meetings for President Trump. I'm Michael Barr. More ahead.
I'm John Stashauer in sports. The Devils fired coach John Himes and then lost to Vegas. Islanders lost in Montreal. College basketball, a loss for Rutgers, a win for St. John.
That's all straight ahead on Bloomberg Daybreak. On Bloomberg 1130 New York, Bloomberg 99.1 Washington, D.C., Bloomberg 106.1 Boston, Bloomberg 960 San Francisco, Sirius XM 119, and around the world on BloombergRadio.com and via the Bloomberg Business app.
And good morning, I'm John Tucker.
I'm Nathan Hager. U.S. futures are gaining after the latest developments on trade. It's coming up to 5:01 on Wall Street. We check the markets every 15 minutes throughout the trading day on Bloomberg. S&P futures are higher by 14 points right now. Dow futures up 131. NASDAQ futures higher by 50 points. The DAX in Germany up 1.1%. The CAC in Paris up 1.25%. The 10-year's down 9/30 seconds. The yield 1.74%. 2-year Treasury yield 1.56%. COMEX gold down 0.3%, down $4.10 to $14.8020 an ounce. The euro is at 1.1074 against the dollar, and the yen at 108.71. John?
And we begin with the positive developments on the U.S.-China trade talks coming through in just the last hour. Bloomberg News has learned the two sides are moving closer to an agreement, which could be sealed before December 15th. And Bloomberg's Tom Busby joins us now with the very latest. Tom, good morning.
Good morning, John and Nathan. Sources tell us Washington and Beijing are moving closer to agreeing on the amount of tariffs that would be rolled back in a Phase 1 trade deal. People familiar with the matter say President Trump's comments yesterday downplaying the urgency of a deal don't mean that talks are stalling. U.S. negotiators expect a Phase 1 deal with China to be completed before tariffs are set to rise on December 15th. Still, there are outstanding issues in negotiations, including how to guarantee China's purchases of U.S. farm goods and exactly which tariffs will be rolled back. I'm Tom Busby, Bloomberg Daybreak.
And Tom, that progress on trade talks comes despite ramped up tensions over human rights issues. Last night, the U.S. House approved legislation to sanction Chinese officials for abuse against Muslims. We turn to Joe Sopcich for details from our Bloomberg 99.1 newsroom in Washington.
The issue of human rights abuses in China has taken center stage. This is something that the Trump administration hasn't particularly emphasized and as at times appeared to be going along with reluctantly. But the sentiment in Congress is pretty clear. They want to send a message to China on a number of fronts, including alleged human rights abuses against the Muslim minority in China.
The bill passed by a vote of 407-1. The House and Senate expect to send the measure to President Trump before the holiday recess.
And China is strongly condemning that legislation, saying it will respond accordingly, but has so far offered no details. We get more from Bloomberg's Selena Wang in Beijing.
If you look at China's response to the passage of the Hong Kong bill, China gave a pretty measured and relatively symbolic response to that bill. So it shows that China doesn't necessarily want to mix these human rights issues with trade and that they are still eager to make a deal. China is trying to balance having a strong stance to the domestic audience, showing that they're standing up to foreign interference while not putting any more pressure on its already deteriorating economy.
In response to the measure, Chinese state media warns that U.S. politicians with stakes in China should, quote, be careful.
Well, that uncertainty plus weak economic data led to a down day for stocks in Asia. Bloomberg's Juliet Sally joins us from Singapore with details. Good morning, Juliet.
Good morning, John and Nathan. Australian stocks were once again the underperformers as slower than expected third quarter GDP down under raised concerns the RBA would need to cut rates again. Elsewhere, more bad data out of Hong Kong with a PMI reading for November coming in at 38.5, the lowest level since the SARS crisis in 2003. In Japan, the Nikkei 225 shed 1%, but Chinese stocks saw more muted action, the CSI 300 closing flat at 3,849 points. In Singapore, I'm I'm Juliet Sarli, Bloomberg Daybreak.
Juliet, thanks. Oil is gaining for a third day as OPEC and its allies prepare for talks in Vienna. The group is sending mixed signals about whether they'll cut output. James Athey is senior investment manager at Aberdeen Standard.
The ability of OPEC to manage markets has been waning and continues to wane. When OPEC tries to play the game of boosting prices, all they do is squeeze themselves out of the market so that you end up with the price exactly where it was when they started.
OPEC and its allies have been curbing output for nearly 3 years. The current agreement expires at the end of March. Prices right now, Brent is up 1.7%, NYMEX crude up 1.5%.
In the UK, the pound hit the strongest level since May as traders step up bets on a conservative win at next week's election. We get details from Bloomberg Daybreak Europe anchor Caroline Hepker, who joins us live from London. Good morning, Caroline.
Good morning, John and Nathan. Cable has pushed up above $1.30 as polls show Boris Johnson's Conservatives holding their lead over Jeremy Corbyn's Labour Party. President Trump in the UK for the NATO meeting seems to have done as he promised and stayed out of the campaign. But whilst investors see the Tories as the most market-friendly or perhaps the least worst option, predicting the great British voting public has become notoriously difficult. And in a race that only lasts 5 weeks, there's still 1 week to go. Live in London, I'm Caroline Hepker, Bloomberg Daybreak.
Caroline, thanks. And on the corporate front, we have a leadership change at one of the world's biggest tech companies. The founders of Google, Larry Page and Sergey Brin, stepping down from Alphabet and handing the reins to Google CEO Sundar Pichai. Here with reaction, Gene Munster. He's the managing partner at Loop Ventures.
I was not expecting this, but in some ways I wasn't surprised. The company is moving into a different chapter. Google proper, the next chapter is going to be a lot around policy and data privacy and regulation. There's another part of me that's just sad because they've had such a profound impact on our lives, and just a reminder that even the greats move on.
Sundar Pichai will have oversight of both Google and Alphabet. Larry Page and Sergey Brin are still controlling shareholders and will remain on the board. And some breaking news crossing the Bloomberg this morning. This has to do with Saudi Aramco. It's said to consider the top-end pricing for up to $25.6 billion for its initial public offering. Dow futures right now up 114 points. S&P futures, they're up 12 points. You're listening to Bloomberg Daybreak. And it's now 5:07 on Wall Street. Let's get news from around the world this morning. And we say good morning to Bloomberg's Michael Barr.
John, thank you very much. President Trump attacked one of the leaders of the impeachment inquiry, calling him a very sick man. It comes as a House Intelligence Committee report calls for Trump's removal. Bloomberg's Bob Moon has the latest.
The report approved by the committee on a party line vote seeks to make the case that Trump's actions require urgent attention by Congress, calling the threat he'll continue his behavior a clear and present danger.
There is, I think, grave risk to the country with waiting until we have every last fact.
Chairman Adam Schiff says the evidence of Trump's misconduct is overwhelming. In London, Trump fired back with perhaps his most personal attack yet.
I think Adam Schiff is a deranged human being.
Today, the House Judiciary Committee takes the handoff, hearing from a panel of impeachment scholars on whether Trump should be removed from office. Bob Moon, Bloomberg Daybreak.
The House report also claims there was contact between President Trump's personal attorney, Rudy Giuliani, and the top Republican on the intelligence panel, Congressman Devin Nunes. According to the report, it includes phone records that show Giuliani also engaged in frequent contacts with the White House and with Lev Parnas, a Giuliani associate who is under indictment on charges of using foreign money to make illegal campaign contributions. The calls took place at around the same time Giuliani was leading the effort to oust the U.S. ambassador to Ukraine. According to the report, Nunes also had multiple contacts in April with Parnas. President Trump is in London for a second day of meetings with fellow NATO leaders. President Trump's first day included multiple impromptu press conferences, including a tense exchange with French President Emmanuel Macron. President Trump also met yesterday with UK Prime Minister Boris Johnson without the press. Today, Johnson talked about the meeting.
We had a very good meeting, and we discussed, as you can imagine, the future of NATO. We discussed what's going on in Syria and various other security matters.
Today, President Trump will meet with German Chancellor Angela Merkel. Republican Congressman Duncan Hunter of California has pleaded guilty to misusing campaign funds. Assistant U.S. Attorney Phil Halpern.
Mr. Hunter now faces resignation, disgrace, and imprisonment.
Hunter could get up to 5 years in prison. Democratic presidential candidate Joe Biden plans to pay for $3.2 trillion in policy proposals with new and higher taxes on the wealthy and corporations. Global news 24 hours a day, on air and on Quick Take by Bloomberg, powered by more than 2,700 journalists and analysts in more than 120 countries. I'm Michael Barr. This is Bloomberg, John.
Michael, thank you. 5:10 of Wall Street. Time now for the Bloomberg NBC Sports Update. Here's John Stashower.
John, a local coach got fired yesterday. It was not the Giants' Pat Shurmur or the Knicks' David Fizdale, two coaches with a combined record of 28 and 103. Those firings could be coming. But it was the Devils, another struggling team, who fired John Himes, promoted assistant Elaine Nesreddine, the Devils' GM. It's Ray Sherrow.
I don't think there's any one player that is performing even at the level, let alone above, that we'd expect or maybe they expect. So that's the thing that's disappointing. You know, obviously change brings opportunity, not only for Elaine Nesreddine, but also for our players, and there's opportunity for them. And to find out kind of where we are here and where we're going to go.
Nesreddine behind the bench last night in Newark, Vegas, the night after beating the Rangers at the Garden 4-1, beat the Devils 4-3. Jonathan Marsh so 3 goals in the third period. The Devils fall to 9-14-4. The Islanders playing back-to-back road games. They won in Detroit, but last night lost in Montreal 4-2. The Canadiens ended an 8-game losing streak. An NFL coach got fired. Ron Rivera in Carolina. The Panthers, 4 years after going 15-1 into the Super Bowl, are 5-7 with 4 straight losses. College basketball, half dozen games between the ACC and Big Ten, including 2 teams ranked in the top 4. Number 1, Louisville. No trouble with Michigan, who was 7-0 under new coach Juwan Howard. Louisville won 58-43. Duke won at Michigan State 87-75. Already the third loss for the Spartans. Rutgers lost at Pittsburgh 71-60. Iowa beat Syracuse 68-54. Closer to home, St. John's improved to 7-2. 79-69 over St. Peter's. The 2 big-name free agent pitchers are both in Southern California, represented by Scott Boras. And yesterday the Yankees met with both Garrett Cole and Steven Strasburg. With the Bloomberg NBC Sports Update, I'm John Stashower. John?
All right, John, thanks a lot. This on a morning when futures indicate a higher cash open on Wall Street. Dow futures up 111 points. S&P futures, they're 11 points higher. The NASDAQ futures up 42. This is Bloomberg.
Hey, y'all, Jeff Foxworthy here. Now, if you've ever found yourself repeating the same thing over and over for 75 years, you might be Smokey Bear.
Only you can prevent wildfires.
That's why I'm filling in for Smokey to switch things up, because there's a lot more to say. And I should know because my grandfather was a firefighter. And one of the things he taught me is that the people that love the outdoors the most are often the ones accidentally starting wildfires, which means always BYOB. No, bring your own bucket to the campfire. And be extra careful with things like burning yard trimmings. Don't just walk away, or chances are you might be starting a wildfire. So for the love of the outdoors, go to SmokeyBear.com to learn more about wildfire prevention. Brought to you by the U.S. Forest Service, your state forester, and the Ad Council.
Why has J.D. Power ranked Commonwealth Financial Network #1 in independent advisor satisfaction among financial investment firms for the 6th straight time? We think it comes down to one thing: you. Because it's your input and feedback that keeps us focused on what's most important to you and your clients and continually pushes us to be the best we can be. Maybe that's why we receive top marks in every category of the J.D. Power 2019 Advisor Satisfaction Survey. They named us #1 in client support, #1 in firm leadership, #1 in operational support, #1 in compensation, #1 in professional development support, and #1 in technology support. Ready to partner with the best? Call Commonwealth at 866-462-3638 or visit commonwealth.com and feel the power. Member FINRA/SIPC, a registered investment advisor. For 2019 J.D. Power award information, visit jdpower.com/awards.
Startups and research universities like New Jersey Institute of Technology are fueling the innovation economy. And few people are better positioned to see what's on the horizon in New Jersey than physicist and state representative Andrew Zwicker.
How technology is transforming our financial sector is revolutionary, and so much of that is in New Jersey. We are innovators when it comes to agriculture, and there is opportunity now for great transformation in how are we going to grow food in an ever-growing population, and how do we turn urban centers into agricultural centers. Autonomous vehicles is another one where we have some of the world's leading experts, and how this will transform how those who are either elderly or are visually impaired or mobilely impaired can start to use autonomous vehicles to transform their lives and have access to transportation they could have never had before.
NJIT, New Jersey Institute of Technology. Learn more at njit.edu/research.
Financial leaders enjoy talking with Tom Keene and Jonathan Farrell.
What was it like having the giant darken the door every once in a while?
Experts appreciate it when what they have to say is understood.
Do you think that we might have seen a cyclical peak in the labor market?
It's the same reason we're recommending Bloomberg Surveillance to you.
Everything you thought would happen is happening.
Weekday mornings at 7 Eastern on Bloomberg Radio, the Bloomberg Business app, and BloombergRadio.com. Bloomberg, the world is listening.
More than just a game, baseball is big business. For the chief revenue officer of the New York Mets, this means overseeing complex operations, key financial drivers, and interpreting data to make critical decisions every day.
How is your business managing complexity? Cohn Resnick can help you improve performance through an integrated business planning strategy that optimizes your data, streamlines processes, and keeps you ahead of the competition. Explore more at cohnresnick.com/MLB. Cohn Resnick, Advisory Assurance Tax. Transform your game.
Influential conversations from Bloomberg Television. Here's Sherry Ann.
The Trump administration has been looking at Chinese tech as a national security threat for some time now, and it's focused on companies like Huawei, ZTE, and TikTok. To that end, a new U.S. agency has a $60 billion budget to help developing countries and businesses find alternatives to companies like Huawei and ZTE. Joining us now from Washington is Robert Strayer, the State Department Deputy Assistant Secretary for Cyber and International Communications and Information Policy. Ambassador, thank you so much for your time today. Now, this latest approach seems to be the carrot approach, where you're trying to convince these developing nations to stay away from cheaper Chinese tech. Is this an acknowledgement that perhaps the stick is not working?
Well, for some time, we've sought to work with developing countries to ensure that they can have reliable and secure communications technology. So this isn't a different approach to the matter. Independently, we're also working with partners and allies to educate them about the risks of 5G, that there can be the potential for vendors of 5G to be under control of another government that would require them to take actions that are not in their citizens' interests. And that's particularly the case in countries like China, where there's no independent judiciary or rule of law for a company to object to be made to take actions in line with their intelligence and security services.
Hear more interviews like this one on Bloomberg Television, streaming live on Bloomberg.com and on the Bloomberg mobile app, or check your local cable listings. Markets, headlines, and breaking news 24 hours a day at Bloomberg.com, the Bloomberg Business app, and on Quick Take by Bloomberg. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
I'm Nathan Hager. Stocks are extending gains in Europe. U.S. equity futures are turning higher after a news report that China and the U.S. are moving closer to a trade deal. We check the markets every 15 minutes throughout the trading day on Bloomberg. S&P futures are higher by 13 points. Dow futures up 126. NASDAQ futures a gain of 46 points. The DAX in Germany up 1.1%. CAC in Paris up 1.25%. The FTSE in London up 0.3%. 10-year is down 9/32, yield 1.74%. 2-year Treasury yield 1.56%. NYMEX crude oil up 1.7%, up 95 cents, $57.05 a barrel. COMEX gold down 0.3%, down $4.80 to $14.79.60 an ounce. The euro at 1.1072 against the dollar. The British pound at 1.3038. And the yen is at 108.74. Sources tell Bloomberg Saudi Aramco is considering pricing its IPO at 32 rials a share. That would be the top end of a marketed range. Bloomberg calculations show the deal would raise $25.6 billion if it prices at the top end before a so-called over-allotment option. Aramco hasn't formally set the final price. It is expected to announce it tomorrow. That's a Bloomberg Business Flash. Now here's Michael Barr with more on what's going on around the world. Michael, good morning.
Good morning, Nathan. The House Judiciary Committee will weigh findings by fellow lawmakers that President Donald Trump misused the power of his office for personal political gain and then obstructed Congress's investigation as possible grounds for impeachment. The committee is prepared this morning for its first hearing since the release of a 300-page report by Democrats on the House Intelligence Committee that found serious misconduct by the president. Today, NATO Secretary General Jens Stoltenberg rejected French criticism that the military alliance is suffering from brain death and insisted that the organization is adapting to modern challenges. It comes as President Trump will attend a second day of NATO meetings in London. In the NHL, the Islanders and Devils lost. The Bruins and Capitals won. In the NBA, the Wizards lost. Global news 24 hours a day on air and on Quick Take by Bloomberg, powered by more than 2,700 journalists and analysts in more than 120 countries. I'm Michael Barr. This is Bloomberg, John.
Michael, thank you. 6:20 on Wall Street, and we're live from the Bloomberg Interactive Broker Studios. This is Bloomberg Daybreak. It's a little bit like being on a teeter-totter. President Trump yesterday downplaying urgency of getting a deal with China this month. And now, the headlines, the U.S. and China moving closer to agreeing on the amount of tariffs that will be rolled back in a phase one deal. Let's bring in our next guest, Lori Calvasina, is the head of U.S. equity strategy at RBC Capital Markets. Lori, what's the challenge when you have to navigate headlines almost on an hourly basis?
Well, I like the teeter-totter analogy. I described
You can steal that one.
I definitely will. I tend to use the word ping pong. We're back and forth, different day, different headline. The thing that we have really tried to keep investors focused on is, one, what's priced into the market, and two, what do we hope to get from this phase one trade deal if and when it happens. In terms of what's priced in, we've seen pretty clearly in our data that trade war sensitive stocks are essentially, if you look at valuation or performance, sort of back where they were in the first quarter of 2018 before the trade war even was on anybody's radar, if you look at them relative to more immune stocks in the trade war. So we've looked at that analysis and said a good resolution has clearly been baked into the market. There's not a lot of upside risk here if we get a deal, but there does seem downside risk if we don't get one. The other thing we've been trying to focus investors on is, if phase one is supposed to be the easy stuff, and frankly we're having a hard time, it seems like, getting across the finish line on the easy stuff, is there anything really coming in this phase one deal that's going to restore business confidence, which has been severely damaged by this trade war? And we've been pretty skeptical on the latter that you would.
Since I get this question a lot, I got to look at the calendar. Yes, it is December. We remember what happened last year. I would have to argue that it's tougher markets to go down in December for a number of factors. Was last year really an aberration?
Well, last year was a growth scare, and we saw the market go down 20% peak to trough, and that's pretty consistent with what we've seen in other growth scares since the financial crisis, when the market has frankly been very afraid of tipping into a recession, but it hasn't quite happened. Now, I don't think we're headed for anything like that this December, but I do think what we saw the last couple of days in the market is that things are a bit fragile, and there is a bit of an impulse to profit taking. If you look at how the market was acting on Monday when we first started to sort of see the market finally react to some of this negative development on trade, we were seeing things like IT services names, software stocks, secular growth winners, very crowded names that really have nothing to do with the trade war or the ISM news we got Monday. Those were some of the hardest hit stocks in the market. And what that told me is that, with markets having been up well over 20% year to date, there's a little bit of an impulse here to take some profits.
Let's move on to 2020. What's the outlook?
So, we actually think stocks are going to be up next year. We're looking for 33.50 at the end of 2020. We're looking for about a 7% move in the market, about a 6% move in earnings growth. But we have described the year as one of moderation, so the return's lower than what we've had this year. But we also think there's going to be some turbulence. We think we're overdue for a pullback. If we don't get it this December, we're going to get it in 1Q. And we also think it's going to be a year of transition, so we're looking for value to outperform in sectors like financials and industrials to do well.
I was going to ask you, where is value right now?
Value, I think it's definitely in the eye of the beholder to some extent, but if you just look at the data, we think that financials and industrials are your most undervalued cyclicals at this point. On our models, they're still trading pretty close to financial crisis lows on a relative basis versus the broad market. Healthcare is a cheap sector. It's one that we've been market weight. We are still a little bit concerned about policy risk. There's been some crowding, but the large cap stocks are actually pretty undervalued, recently hit new lows on a relative basis on our model. So we think those are kind of three sectors where you can find some pretty clear value at this point.
Well, I know you focus on U.S. equity strategy, but what's the rest of the world look like?
So, what's interesting is we've found that some of the same things that make us think the market will flip from growth back to value make us think that the rest of the world might see some leadership relative to the U.S. again. If you look at valuations, the U.S. is clearly overvalued versus rest of the world, and that's generally the case, but the premium is higher than it normally is. When we look at global large cap equity funds, U.S. allocations are at peak. Allocations to Europe are down around historical lows, both UK and continental Europe. So we think there are some seeds for a rotation there. Now, what you need to see is really a trigger, and I think that trigger is some sense of improvement in the global economy, and that's the big question, is whether or not you'll get that trigger. But I do think the stage has been set for perhaps the U.S. to take a bit of a backseat.
Lori, thanks a lot. Appreciate it. Lori Calvasina, head of the U.S. Equity Strategy at RBC Capital Markets, joining us this morning. And ahead of the cash open on Wall Street, looks like Dow futures are up right now 128 points. S&P futures, they're up 13 points. And the NASDAQ E-mini futures, right now they're up 46 points. That's up 0.6%. You're listening to Bloomberg Daybreak.
This is a Bloomberg Market Minute. Are companies hiring? And if so, how many new employees are they taking on? We'll get answers to those questions today with the latest snapshot of private payroll growth from ADP. The November report is expected to show that 135,000 jobs were created last month. And if that does happen, it would mark an improvement from October. The two guys that founded Google as college students are stepping away as leaders of the parent company Alphabet. Larry Page and Sergey Brin, both 46, will hand the CEO reins to Sundar Pichai. The 47-year-old is currently the chief executive at Google, so now he'll head both. Page and Brin aren't going too far. They'll still be controlling shareholders and remain on the board at the company. Well, despite the heated rhetoric over U.S.-China trade, Bloomberg has learned that the two sides are moving closer to a phase one trade deal. Investors seem to like the news. Dow futures up 118, NASDAQ futures up 44, S&P futures up 12. Gina Cervetti, Bloomberg Radio.
Asset managers who seize change to launch new strategies, add distribution channels, or exploit new technology to re-engineer the investor experience are often rewarded. However, in an industry paralyzed with complexity, few act with agility or decisively. Few run their businesses strategically, yet the most competitive managers in the market know with the right partner and a flexible operating system, you can. Go boldly toward change with SEI Investment Manager Services.
I'm Steve Meyer, president of SEI's Investment Manager Services. At SEI, we understand the emerging forces that will define success for asset managers and what firms will need to compete tomorrow. That's why we continually optimize SEI's global operating platform. If your business requires greater agility, our advanced technology, integrated best-in-class systems, and multi-asset expertise can be your catalyst for business transformation.
With SEI Investment Manager Services, you lead the charge in a competitive marketplace. Learn more at SEIC.com/seize change.
I've got to tell you about our beautiful city break in Bath. Midweek is the perfect time to beat the crowds. Just an hour and a half by train from London. It was so relaxing. We headed straight for Bath Christmas Market. Oh, I can still smell the roasted chestnuts and mulled wine from the chalets. Then it was time for glow-in-the-dark mini-golf. I got a hole-in-one. Well, 3. I'm a bit rusty, okay? There's so much to do in Bath. I'm already planning my next trip.
Discover the magic of Bath this Christmas. Plan ahead at visitbath.co.uk/Christmas.
This winter, there's no place like Wicked, the award-winning West End musical. Discover the incredible untold story of the Witches of Oz and how one came to be called good and the other wicked. Wicked at London's Apollo Victoria Theatre. Extra shows added for Christmas.
The very thought of you.
Michael Bublé. See him performing in the most picturesque and beautiful outdoor settings across the UK in July and August with Priority. If you're on O2, get Priority tickets up to 48 hours before general release right now. Search for Priority. Michael Bublé, live across the UK in July and August. Unforgettable live music experiences with O2. O2, breathe it all in. Terms apply.
I used to be a bit of a rubbish sleeper. I'd toss and turn all night, and somehow I could never find the comfy bit of the mattress. It was a proper nightmare. That's what brought me here, testing mattresses in the Which Test Lab. We use a custom-made barrel rolling machine to simulate a decade's worth of use. And the mattresses that perform best are the only ones we recommend for your bedroom.
Which tests harder so you can buy smarter. Visit which.co.uk.
So, on Monday I left work at 5:36 instead of 5:30. Wednesday was 5:41. Yesterday I made the whole team a cup of tea. And today I lent someone my stapler. Do I deserve this? Yes, I think I do.
Go on. Treat yourself to an O2 Black Friday deal. We've slashed our prices by up to £300 on selected handsets. You know you deserve it. Search O2 Black Friday.
It's 4th of December 2019. O2 Refresh Credit by Telefonica UK Limited. Eligibility and terms apply.
What's the sign of a really first-class funeral directors? Is it how they're with you every step of the way? Is it the care they take looking after your loved one? The superb organisation they show on the day itself? The thoughtful little touches you maybe weren't expecting? Yes, it's all those things. But there's another sign you should also be looking for. The one that says Dignity. You'll find it's on every one of our branches and on the Dignity website. When you see it, you'll know you couldn't be in better hands. Dignity Funeral Directors. Taking the greatest care.
Broadcasting live from the Bloomberg Interactive Broker Studio in New York. Bloomberg 1130 to Washington, D.C. Bloomberg 99.1 to Boston. Bloomberg 106.1 to San Francisco. Bloomberg 960 to the country. Sirius XM Channel 119 and around the globe. The Bloomberg Business app and BloombergRadio.com. This is Bloomberg Daybreak.
And it's 5:30 on Wall Street. Good morning. I'm Nathan Hager.
And I'm John Tucker. We are just about 4 hours away from the opening of U.S. trading. And let's get you up to date on the news you need to know this hour. U.S. futures, they are gaining after positive developments on the U.S.-China trade talks. Bloomberg News has learned the two sides are moving closer to an agreement, which could be sealed before December 15th. Let's get the very latest now from Bloomberg's Tom Busby.
Sources say the U.S. and China are moving closer to agreeing on the amount of tariffs to be rolled back in a Phase 1 trade deal. People familiar with the matter say U.S. negotiators expect a Phase 1 deal with China to be completed before tariffs are set to rise on December 15th. That's despite ramped-up tensions over human rights issues and protests in Hong Kong. Still, there are outstanding issues on how to guarantee China's purchases of U.S. farm goods and exactly which tariffs will be rolled back. I'm Tom Busby, Bloomberg Daybreak.
All right, Tom, thanks. We have big corporate news as well, with word that Google founders Larry Page and Sergey Brin are stepping down from their roles at Alphabet. Let's get more on that story now from Bloomberg's Charlie Pellet.
Sundar Pichai, the CEO of Google, will also be the CEO of Alphabet. Both Page and Brin, the major shareholders, will remain on the company board. In a statement, Page and Brin wrote, quote, "We are deeply committed to Google and Alphabet for the long term and will remain actively involved as board members, shareholders, and co-founders." Charlie Pellet, Bloomberg Daybreak.
Thanks, Charlie. On the earnings front, shares of Salesforce fell about 2% at late trading. The software maker gave a profit forecast that fell short of estimates. Campbell Soup and H&R Block report results today.
Billionaire investor Carl Icahn is pushing HP to move ahead with takeover talks from Xerox. In a letter to shareholders, Icahn says a tie-up between the two companies could lead to more than $2 billion in synergies.
And sources tell us Saudi Aramco is considering pricing its IPO at the top of its marketed range. That would raise more than $25 billion for the state-owned company.
Oil is gaining for a third day as an industry report points to shrinking U.S. stockpiles. OPEC and its allies meet in Vienna to decide production policy this week. Checking prices now, Brent is up 1.9% to $61.96 a barrel. NYMEX crude is up 1.6% at $57.01.
And in the UK, the pound hit the strongest level since May. Traders are stepping up bets on a Conservative win at next week's election as polls show Boris Johnson's party holding its lead over the Labour Party. Right now, sterling is at 130.40. That's up 0.4% against the U.S. dollar. And futures in the U.S. point to a higher open on Wall Street right now. The Dow futures up 130 points. The S&P futures up 13. NASDAQ futures 48 points higher. You're listening to Bloomberg. And it's now 5:33 on Wall Street. Let's get news from around the world this morning. We say good morning once again to Bloomberg's Michael Barr.
John, thank you very much. The House Judiciary Committee takes over the impeachment inquiry into President Trump today. The committee will hear from constitutional scholars as it begins to consider whether the evidence laid out in a 300-page report from the Intelligence Committee warrants impeachment. Intelligence Chairman Adam Schiff said the president misused the power of his office to get his political dirty work done.
I am gravely concerned that if we merely accept this, that we invite not only further corruption of our elections by this president, but we also invite it of the next president.
The White House said Schiff's report reflects nothing more than the frustrations of Democrats. Meanwhile, Republican lawmakers held a news conference last night in response to the report. Doug Collins, the ranking member on the House Judiciary Committee, says he thinks the Democrats have a problem.
Tomorrow provides nothing except a dreary-eyed, drowsy proposal for this country to watch as the impeachment process slowly drags on with no direction, no focus, because they're having one big problem. And the big problem is the president did nothing wrong, and they can't prove it.
President Trump is in London for a second day for more meetings with fellow NATO leaders. Yesterday, there was a tense exchange in front of the cameras between President Trump and French President Emmanuel Macron. Trump suggested to Macron that many of the ISIS fighters who were captured were coming from places in Europe like France. But Macron pushed back on that, saying the majority of them are from the Mideast.
Would you like some nice ISIS fighters? Yeah, I can give them. You can take everyone you want.
Let's be serious. The very large number of fighters you have on the ground are ISIS fighters coming from Syria, from Iraq, and the region. It is true that you have foreign fighters coming from Europe, but this is a tiny minority of the overall problem we have.
Today, Trump will meet with German Chancellor Angela Merkel today. Democratic presidential candidate Joe Biden plans to pay for $3.2 trillion in policy proposals with new and higher taxes on the wealthy and corporations. Democrat Kamala Harris suspended her presidential campaign after months of declining poll numbers and dwindling funds. Global news 24 hours a day on air and on Quick Take by Bloomberg, powered by more than 2,700 journalists and analysts in more than 120 countries. I'm Michael Barr. This is Bloomberg, John.
Michael, thank you. Coming up on 5:36 on Wall Street. Time now for the Bloomberg NBC Sports Update. Here's John Stashower.
John, 26 games into the NHL season, the Devils decided they had seen enough under coach John Hines. Only 9 wins. Weekend losses to the Rangers and Sabres by a combined score of 11-1. Hines was in his 5th season. Only once did he get the Devils to the playoffs. The new coach, at least on an interim basis, is Elaine Nasreddine.
Obviously, a lot of emotions. Just found out a couple hours ago, so a lot goes through your mind. Can't help but think about John and the relationship we've had the last 10 years, and those are not great circumstances. It is an opportunity, but it's going to take time to settle in. But we have a game to win tonight, so that's where the focus is right now.
And that game, another loss, beaten by Vegas 4-3. The Islanders lost 4-2 in Montreal. College basketball saw St. John's beat St. Peter's 79-69. Rutgers fell at Pittsburgh 71-60. That's part of the ACC Big Ten Challenge. It also saw top-ranked Louisville beat 4th-ranked Michigan, and Duke with a win at Michigan State. No change at the top from the College Football Playoff Committee. Ohio State, LSU, Clemson, and Georgia. But there will be change when they reveal their final rankings because LSU plays Georgia on Saturday. The feeling is unbeaten LSU will get into the playoff even with a loss, but Georgia won't. And the final spot would then go to either Utah, Oklahoma, or Baylor. 4 years ago, the Carolina Panthers won the Super Bowl, and Cam Newton was the NFL's MVP. Now the injured Newton's future with the Panthers is iffy. And Coach Ron Rivera was just fired. Carolina 5-7, 4 straight losses. Assistant Perry Fuel takes over for the rest of the season. With a Bloomberg NBC Sports Update, I'm John Stashower.
John, thank you. 5:37 on Wall Street. The latest edition of Bloomberg Business Week is on newsstands now with the cover on Google at war, how the company's fighting with employees over doing business with the government. Also in this week's issue, the many ways that Wall Street is getting into sports betting. Eddie Massa wrote that story for Bloomberg Business Week.
The most obvious example is that NASDAQ has licensed some of its exchange technology to horse race markets.
Well, you can read more about this and other stories in this week's edition of Bloomberg Business Week on newsstands now and online at businessweek.com. Terminal customers can subscribe to the magazine at MAG Go. And listen to Business Week with Carol Masser and Jason Kelly weekdays at 2 p.m. Wall Street time right here on Bloomberg Radio. And it is now 5:38 on Wall Street. Time now for the Tri-State Business Report. After that, we are joined live by Bloomberg's John Metaxas. John, good morning to you.
Good morning to you, John. So many luxury condos have been built in Manhattan that the market has become soft, even with the freebies developers are offering. The Kent on the Upper East Side is paying buyers comment charges for 5 years. But still, 51 of the 83 condos remain unsold at asking prices between $4 and $12 million each. And it's the same story around Manhattan. Connecticut's public employee pension funds will divest their $30 million in holdings in gun manufacturers and prohibit future investments in those companies. The move comes almost 7 years after a gunman killed 20 children and 6 adults at the Sandy Hook Elementary School in Newtown. Rutgers returning football coach Greg Schiano has some big sweeteners in his new $32 million contract. The New York Post reports he'll get a $50,000 bonus if Rutgers gets at least 20,000 season tickets and an additional $50,000 for each additional 4,000 tickets, up to 32,000. This year, Rutgers sold fewer than 17,000 season tickets. With the Bloomberg Tri-State Business Report, I'm John Metaxas.
John, thanks a lot. 5:40 on Wall Street. Bloomberg Radio is on the air from San Francisco to New York, London to Hong Kong. Let's check in now with our global news team for some of the top stories heard on our 300 affiliate radio stations around the world.
I'm Gina Cervetti, and on WBBM in Chicago, I'm reporting on a new Robert Half survey showing that just over half of U.S. workers admit they'll be workshopping this holiday season or logging in from the office to track down bargains.
I'm Steve Potusk, and on 1010 Wins in New York, we are talking about New York app firm Handy supporting calls to reclassify gig workers as full-time employees.
I'm Caroline Hepke on Bloomberg DAB Digital Radio in London. We're reporting on the NATO leaders meeting.
I'm Courtney Donahoe on KRLD in Dallas. Star Wars fans must wait until next year for Baby Yoda dolls.
And those are some of the stories our 2,700 Bloomberg journalists and analysts are working on this morning around the world. And in other news, United Airlines dealing a setback to Boeing. United has placed a $7 billion order for 50 Airbus A321neo jets. They'll replace aging Boeing 757s, which have gone out of production. This is Bloomberg.
Why do hedge funds and other alternative managers rely on Pershing? Mark Alderati, a managing director at BNY Mellon's Pershing and head of Prime Services, explains.
In today's environment of market volatility, Pershing's Prime Services is well positioned to support the needs of hedge funds and other alternative investment managers. Whether it's customized financing or securities lending solutions, platform access, or business expansion, BNY Mellon's Pershing is a prime broker who's committed to this business and agile enough to meet your evolving demands. Pershing helps to solve the needs of clients by advocating for them, providing unwavering strength, deep supply, and award-winning service that is at the core of everything we do. Find out what sets Pershing's prime brokerage team apart.
Learn more about the unique and industry-leading solutions for hedge funds and other alternative managers offered by BNY Mellon's Pershing. Visit our website at Pershing.com. Pershing LLC, member FINRA, NYSE, SIPC.
Have you wanted to speak a new language, but you thought it'd be too hard or take too much time? Then go to Babbel.com, download the app, and try it for free. In just 15 minutes a day, you'll be on your way to speaking a new language in just a few weeks. And right now, you can try Babbel for free. Babbel starts out teaching you words and phrases by matching them with pictures. You won't believe how easy the interactive program is. Soon the sentences get a little bigger, and before you know it, you're having simulated conversations voiced by native speakers. And because Babbel is crafted by language experts and uses the spaced repetition method, in just 10 to 15 minutes a day, you'll be speaking the language of your choice with real confidence. With Babbel, you can speak a language. Just go to Babbel.com and start your first lesson in the language of your choice for free. Download the Babbel app or go to Babbel.com and try it for free. That's Babbel.com.
'Tis the season to be hunched over your laptop. Not on our watch. In real life, you can feel your senses and your baskets. Feel all the sights, sounds, lols, and OMGs. Wear laughing emojis on actual smiley faces. Battery is running low. Take the kids to Santa's grotto. In real life, you can find just the right present using the most advanced search engine in the world. Your eyes. We can't in real life. Brent Cross, London. Free parking for all sleighs and cars.
Sometimes in business, you have to take risks, but trading across borders and currencies shouldn't be one of them. With Western Union Business Solutions, we can help you manage the risk of doing business internationally. Our valuable experience, expert knowledge, and extensive global network makes us the ideal trusted partner for your business. And with our customer-focused support team, you'll receive a dedicated solution and personalized service. Visit westernunionbusiness.com. Western Union Business Solutions, a global financial network you can trust.
On 3, our unlimited data is actually unlimited, like 4 reels. That means you can scroll and scroll and scroll through all the Black Friday deals.
Because we have no speed limits, no data caps, and you'll be 5G ready at no extra cost.
Wow, so many savings.
Our Black Friday deals are now on. Save up to £480. Switch to 3, in-store or online. See 3.co.uk/unlimited-data. Savings on selected phones on 24-month contracts. Ends 5th of December. Terms apply.
So, on Monday I left work at 5:36 instead of 5:30. Wednesday was 5:41. Yesterday I made the whole team a cup of tea. And today I lent someone my stapler. Do I deserve this? Yes, I think I do.
Go on. Treat yourself to an O2 Black Friday deal. We've slashed our prices by up to £300 on selected handsets. You know you deserve it. Search O2 Black Friday.
Ends 4th of December 2019. O2 Refresh Credit by Telefonica UK Limited. Eligibility and terms apply.
It's 24 hours a day, on air and at TikTok on Twitter. Powered by more than 2,700 journalists and analysts in over 120 countries. This is Bloomberg Radio. Now, a global news update.
The House Intelligence Committee has released their impeachment report that asserts President Trump misused the office.
The report is broken down into 2 sections. One on Ukraine. Democrats cite a July 25th call between President Trump and Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky, in which Trump asked Zelensky to investigate former Vice President Joe Biden. The other section on an alleged White House obstruction of the impeachment investigation. Both expected to be separate articles of impeachment.
Correspondent Mandy Gaither. The Justice Department has charged 8 people with conspiring to conceal the source of more than $3.5 million in 2016 campaign donations to Hillary Clinton. Kamala Harris is ending her bid for the Democratic presidential nomination. She told supporters in an email that her campaign doesn't have the financial resources to continue. I'm John Trout.
Wake up and text. Why all the top-tier experts? Because business is not a magic trick.
Give us a sense of the economic backdrop.
Bloomberg Markets.
Which financial records are these?
Weekday mornings at 10 Eastern on Bloomberg Radio. Bloomberg, the world is listening. Headlines and breaking news 24 hours a day at Bloomberg.com, the Bloomberg Business app, and on Quick Take by Bloomberg. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
I'm Nathan Hager. Stocks are rebounding from yesterday's declines after a news report that China and the U.S. are moving closer to a trade deal. Treasuries and gold are racing gains. We check the markets every 15 minutes throughout the trading day on Bloomberg. S&P futures are higher by almost 13 points right now. Dow futures up 125 points. NASDAQ futures higher by 47.5. The DAX in Germany up 1%. The CAC in Paris up 1.2%. 10-year down, 830 seconds, yield 1.74%. 2-year Treasury yield 1.55%. NYMEX crude oil is up 1.5%, up 83 cents, $56.94 a barrel. COMEX gold down 0.2% or $2.60. 1481.80 gets you an ounce of gold on the COMEX. The euro at 1.1073 against the dollar, and the yen at 108.71. At 8:15 Wall Street time, we get private payrolls data from ADP. Then at 9:45, it's market services and composite PMIs. The ISM non-manufacturing index comes out at 10, and Campbell Soup and H&R Block are among companies reporting earnings today. That's a Bloomberg Business Flash. Now here's Michael Barr with a check of what else is going on around the world. Michael.
Thank you very much, Nathan. NATO meetings continue outside London. President Trump arrived and posed for a quick photo op today and exchanged pleasantries with British Prime Minister Boris Johnson and NATO Secretary General Jens Stoltenberg. This morning on Twitter, the president writes that he and Johnson discussed NATO and trade. Johnson had asked President Trump not to weigh in on the general election that will take place in the UK UK next week, and Tuesday, the president said he would comply. The impeachment inquiry into President Trump shifts today to the House Judiciary Committee. In the NHL, the Islanders and Devils lost. The Bruins and Capitals won. In the NBA, the Wizards lost. Global news 24 hours a day, on air and on Quick Take by Bloomberg, powered by more than 2,700 journalists and analysts in more than 120 countries. I'm Michael Barr. This is Bloomberg, John.
Michael, thank you. 5:49 on Wall Street. I'm John Tucker. This is Bloomberg Daybreak. OPEC and its allies are preparing for talks in Vienna, and they appear to be sending mixed signals about whether they're going to cut their output. Let's get more of these talks and the path for crude oil going forward from Alex Longley, Bloomberg Oil Trading Reports, joining us from our studios in London. Alex, remind everybody the overriding story for OPEC and all producers, I guess, is overproduction at this point.
It's a trade-off with cuts that had been agreed earlier in the year and had started in 2016. We've seen OPEC and particularly Saudi Arabia kind of steadily cutting deeper to offset growing supplies from elsewhere. What we're seeing now as we arrive into this meeting is a bit of posturing from Iraq, who have mooted the idea that the group may want to cut deeper. And I think we can take that with a pinch of salt. Iraq has been probably the biggest country to ignore its production cuts since they began in 2016. And what we're slowly gravitating around is a probable extension of the current cuts that expire in March. We had Oman saying this morning that Middle East Gulf OPEC producers were all broadly in accord that the measures should be extended to the end of next year. So I think now it seems to be a question of how long we'll get this extension for, and whether OPEC can kind of bide its time and see how 2020 looks.
Do we call that cheating anymore? Or is that a dirty word?
There clearly has been a lot of cheating. The Saudis have offset a lot of what other producers have done. Actually, in our survey this month, Angola's production came down quite sharply due to kind of unexpected losses there. So it does vary, and obviously OPEC is such a politically volatile group. You see Libyan output from month to month kind of bounce up and down. But clearly the big cheaters out there have been Iraq and Nigeria, and there'll be a real effort at this meeting to kind of rally around them and force them to kind of comply as they said they would many months and years ago.
Okay, so when there is cheating, it sounds to me what you're saying is that Saudi Arabia sort of picks up the mantle. Are they still willing to do that?
Well, the signals have been going into the meeting that the Saudis would kind of use that as the stick to beat its other OPEC members with. It always has kind of picked up the slack and cut a lot deeper. And this time around, they're seemingly indicating that actually they're not going to do that. For instance, Saudi Arabia has lifted production quite sharply to compensate for refilling its inventories after the Abqaiq attacks. And they've kind of suggested that they don't necessarily have to reduce again because they're still within their quota. And it's just that they had cut so much more in previous months that they were sort of 600,000-700,000 barrels a day below that level. So that's kind of the posturing they've been coming into the meeting with, suggesting that they probably won't cut output further. The flip side is, of course, if they don't do that, then markets don't look too rosy early next year, and the Saudis are going to pay for that through crude prices.
Russia, remind everybody, is also a big player in all this. Where do they stand?
Well, the Russian issue is an interesting one. They've raised this issue of gas condensate production. They want that to be excluded from their quota. They say that essentially because of new gas fields starting up, they're unable to kind of curb their condensate output, which is kind of a type of extra light oil, which isn't produced in quite the same volumes by, say, Saudi Arabia or the Middle Eastern countries. Their main argument is that they want kind of special dispensation to have their condensate output excluded from quotas, and that's another thing that's going to make the headlines out of this meeting kind of messy, because we're going to be talking in kind of great detail about the types of oil that are produced and who's going to be including what in their quotas and who's going to comply with what quotas. Will the Saudis produce up to a certain level and then cut back again, or will they stay where they are now? So I think what you're likely to see is kind of a very messy set of headlines, and the details kind of coming out in the wash in the days afterwards.
The United States is now an oil exporter, at least it was in the last quarter, the last figures I saw. How does that figure into OPEC's thinking, the shale production in the U.S.? About 30 seconds.
Well, it's a major rival producer, and the big thing with US production, as with production from other non-OPEC countries, is that's what's weighing on the balances in early 2020. That's why producers are kind of scratching their heads and wondering if they need to cut deeper or not. For the time being, it seems as though they're going to bide their time, but ultimately the problem they have is this deluge of supply that seems to be coming online in the first half of 2020.
Alex, a pleasure. Alex Longley, Bloomberg Oil Trading Reports from our London studios as we check Brent right now. Up $1.02, 61.84, and NYMEX up 79 at 56.89. Nathan.
All right, John, thank you. It's 5:54 on Wall Street. Time for our Bloomberg Law Report. Let's get to the legal stories we're watching this morning from Bloomberg's Joan Doniger.
A big defeat in a small town for Nestle, courtesy of a panel of the Michigan Court of Appeals. That 3-judge panel ruled Nestle's high-capacity well pumping station in Osceola Township did not meet an exemption to local zoning rules. The company wants the water to help top off Ice Mountain water bottles. The U.S. Department of Agriculture won't be able to recover $18 million it paid Deutsche Bank and CoBank under an export guarantee program. And Washington State is looking at tying Boeing's nearly $9 billion in tax breaks to the size of the company's workforce there.
Bloomberg Law. Everything you need on one legal research platform. Guidance, analysis, and Bloomberg Market Intelligence. Find out more at BloombergLaw.com.
And now another legal story we're watching. 100 residents of rural Montana going up against one of the world's largest companies at the Supreme Court. The residents say Atlantic Richfield, which is owned by BP, is responsible for removing lead and arsenic deposits on their properties from decades of copper smelting operations. For more on the case, Bloomberg's June Grosso speaks with Pat Parento, a professor at Vermont Law School.
During the oral arguments, most of the justices seemed inclined to stop a trial from going forward.
It's clear that the court is struggling with balancing the rights of the landowner and, if you will, the rights of ARCO, or more properly, probably the deference to EPA's judgment about what should be done here. And the justices are trying to find a way that whatever remedy the landowners want to get from their state court action would be approved by EPA. This is unusual. I'm not sure the mechanism by which EPA could do something like this, but clearly a number of the justices are not comfortable just letting this case go to trial before a state court. They want to make sure that EPA retains control over whatever ultimately happens to this site.
Could they write an opinion and insert EPA must have control over site when there is no regulation that seems to allow the landowners to say, EPA, can you approve this?
Right, and Justice Sotomayor was saying, why didn't the landowners approach EPA with their proposed remedy? And ARCO's lawyers, I think, properly said, well, they did try to convince EPA to do more, and EPA declined to do it. And so there's a disagreement about what really should be done at this site. But in the end, the one thing EPA could possibly do is to certify that whatever remedy is ordered to restore the private owner's property doesn't conflict with the remedy that EPA has required. The problem there is EPA's remedy is still ongoing and won't be completed until 2023 at the earliest. So it's going to be very difficult for EPA to approve a remedy that might be ordered by the state court before EPA has actually completed its remedy. It's a very complicated situation, unprecedented, I would say, under Superfund at this point.
That is Vermont Law School professor Pat Parento speaking with Bloomberg's June Grosso. Catch more of that interview plus analysis of the latest legal news by subscribing to the Bloomberg Law Podcast. Download the show at Bloomberg.com/podcast. Attorneys can find exceptional legal research and business development tools at BloombergLaw.com.